Morning. You know, challenges are everywhere, all the time. And I'm very happy that this time the challenges that we put forward on trans and interdisciplinarity is something that it is with us, at least in relationship with biodynamics, all the time. One challenge is how to assemble a project able to address an issue like biorelated one, putting together various disciplines, chemistry, physics, engineering, and so forth, biology, medicine, and also some deep thinking. And on the other hand is the other side of the barricade, how to assess, how to evaluate such a proposal. And apparently, this is an open question. That means, well, I don't know which is the best recipe to build up a project, but what I know is that the society of today is not prepared as yet to provide, let's say, fair evaluation of such an attempt. So there are various challenges coming from a scientist working in the field. But I think that beyond these challenges, how to go further, how to think of this issue in a proper way. And I'm very happy that Professor Michel Dumitru took this challenge and said, well guys, please be careful. I have something very interesting to tell you, and I'm very happy that you are here. Thank you.
Well, as always, the pleasure is mine because I have been collaborating with Professor Georgiou for, I don't know, maybe 15 years now.
Yes.
Because I have been working for many years, many more than I want to recall now, in the administration of the University of Bucharest. And even after I stepped down before the pandemic, in December 2019, Professor Georgiou was very generous to keep me on the board of this institute. So I'm coming at least twice every year in this capacity. But other than that, I know what the team here is doing, and I have a very high appreciation for your work. Well, yes, indeed, coming from philosophy, and more specifically from logic, it is quite natural to think about the role, the place that we should have, or we could have, when we talk with our fellows in the universities or academic setting who are doing real research of the world, research of the society, research of real issues. Whereas in general, philosophers are dealing with discussing how we approach from a methodological standpoint or from a more conceptual analysis standpoint, those kinds of researches that we are doing. So, as they say at the meta level, we do not engage directly with the world most of the time, but we engage with the way we engage with the world. It's a sort of reflexive meta approach. Other than that, since I have been working for many years in the administration of higher education, I know that those disciplines, the humanities, I wouldn't say that they are marginal, but they are not in the mainstream. I mean, when we ask for resources, for money, for doing research, we are not actually the first one who could get those resources, and for very good reasons. I mean, if you think the resources are quite limited, and you need some money in order to get a cure for cancer, for AIDS, and on the other hand, you ask money for understanding what Thomas Aquinas said about very obscure passage in Aristotle. So what are we going to do? It's quite obvious. We give money for curing the cancer, or I don't know, famine, or something like that sort. But still, as I am trying to, not to convince you, but to raise some issues for discussions, it seems that the dynamics, the flux of the science, you pointed very well that science is very dynamic, and you have to figure out what is going to happen in the next, I don't know, 100 years or so. And it seems that the pressures of the very complex issues that we face are going to make us take more and more into consideration the dimensions that the social sciences and the humanities will bring to this kind of discussion. So, yeah, the questions that I'm going to raise and to propose to you are why interdisciplinarity in general, then what gets in the way of interdisciplinarity across the board with the humanities who are partner disciplines. When I'm saying interdisciplinarity, and I'm not using any time transdisciplinarity, is just for saving the breath, but I think those two distinct and complementary phenomena together. And lastly, how to achieve genuine interdisciplinarity across the board with social sciences and humanities. What do I mean by this adjective, genuine? So, what confuses me and what gives me a sort of mental tension is the fact that very often we speak about trans and interdisciplinarity in a sort of, I don't know, festive way. I mean, when we have some, I don't want to be ironical about what we are doing now here and what I'm doing now here, but when we gather together and we need a sort of small talk about what we are doing, we raise this issue. Well, we are together, philosophers, physicists, bioengineers, and so on. So what could bring us together? Well, interdisciplinary. Most people here are from Romania originally, but you are in Romania. For the people especially who came here now, there was this joke attributed to Grigore Moisil, a very famous logician, computer scientist, sort of a mathematician. Some 50 years ago, he was a professor of algebra and logic. He was one of the main contributors to many varied logics in the tradition of Jan Lukasiewicz. And the joke that it was attributed to him was that it's very easy to come up with interdisciplinarity, and we are doing that every day in Bucharest because we put together geology, geometry, geography, and the department is going to be run by Joe Bogza. Joe Bogza was a very famous poet at that time. So Romanians are knowing that kind of joke. So when I'm talking about a sort of propagandistic, ideological interdisciplinarity, this is what I have in mind. So I want to oppose that kind of ideological interdisciplinarity with something which is really worth doing it. So this is the reason for saying genuine interdisciplinarity. Okay. Now, first of all, why? How many minutes? 30? Why interdisciplinarity to begin with? Because we all know that we are coming from disciplines. If we look at our institutions, both from the perspective of the curriculum and also from the perspective of the structure of the institution as such, we see that we have programs which are accredited by institutions. We have fields, subfields. We can get even to very tiny subfields of subfields and so on and so forth, which is quite understandable because the way we approach the world, the methods that we are having, the methodology and the technique that we developed is such that we can actually address issues which are very, very well fine-grained. And the big issues, the so-called metaphysical issues, are somehow left aside for people who are actually specializing in that, or for our own, I don't know, pleasure or fun when we are not doing the real thing. On the other hand, we see that in the institutions, we actually carve out the institutions in schools, faculties, as we call them here in Romania, which are the counterpart of departments in the United States. Then we have, I don't know, groups of scientific research. So actually the idea is that the research and the education is focused on disciplinarity to begin with. And that's a very good thing, because when we train new generation in order to become scholars, scientists, educators, we need to give them some very solid knowledge. We cannot start at 20 pretending, claiming that you are, I don't know, Pico della Mirandola. You know everything, and even a bit more than everything. That's done. This is not the age for that kind of approach. And then again, when you ask the people who are in charge to making political decisions with regard to science, we know that the arguments are very strong when we can link our research to something which is very well clear-cut and very well defined. Even though our own topic could be linked and could be related to some other topics which belong to some other groups or sub-disciplines which might cluster with our own research. So the idea is that we should not underestimate the role of and the need for genuine domain and thematic expertise and true experts as well. And by and large, a genuine expert is someone who knows a lot about a given subfield of a given domain. Thus, she or he knows, quote unquote, more and more about less and less. This truncated quote is in the spirit of Bertrand Russell, who said that this is actually the dynamics of science. We are in the situation in which we know more and more about less and less. I am emphasizing this point, especially in our times, because as you know, in the media, especially, people who are not very well educated in science, and in general, they are not very well educated, not only in science, they undermine the role and the importance of the expertise. And there are now tens of books written by specialists in communication. For instance, it's a very very well-known book written by an American sociologist of communication, Tom Nichols, who addresses exactly this very important and dramatic thing, which is the death of the experts. And the experts are questioned by the general public and by the politician, especially in our times in which this kind of populism and demagogy is very, very much spread around. So we actually have to stand up and to defend very strongly the role that experts are having. So I wouldn't say that it would be a good policy to claim that, well, I'm good at everything, therefore you have to give me the resources and the money, because that would be the right kind of argument that the people who are undermining and who are criticizing the experts are expecting. Okay, so the role of the experts is something that is very well known, and each of us is identifying with that kind of expertise that he or she got through his or her PhD education. All the same, it is in the high interest of variable expertise and of the experts themselves not to be narrow-minded. The experts should nurture and forge a broadened perspective which could help them become better thinkers in their own field of expertise. And you know very well that when you get to some sort of impasse in your own research, you are looking somehow around to see what you can get in a sort of very flexible way from some other disciplines which are somehow related to yours, but nevertheless they are distinct from yours. It's a sort of versatility that we need here, a sort of flexibility. So in those times of crisis, which might be major crisis or minor crisis, we feel that if we know more and if we broaden our perspective, then we can get some insights, some suggestions, and even maybe some solutions for our own work. Now, in this context, it is very important, it is not worth it to point out that almost actually 100 years ago, 104 years ago, at the end of the First World War, this very important German sociologist, Max Weber, was invited by a group of German students to give lectures about university and about the curriculum in general, and about the episteme of the university. And Max Weber gave 2 lectures which were very inspiring and very seminal, the scholar's work and the politician's work, which is about vocation. What is the vocation of the politician as a public figure who makes decisions, and what is the vocation of the scholar who knows things about what is important for our societies. So in those 2 lectures, Max Weber raised some very deep issues about the role of the experts and what we should do in the university. And by the way, since that was the beginning of the pandemic that took place 100 years ago, let me tell you that this gentleman, who was like 55 at that time, passed away by the Spanish flu. So he got killed by the pathogens. Max Weber is one of the most important sociologists. He was sort of founding father of modern sociology in general. So for my own topic here, I'm mentioning Max Weber because the question that he raised was, what is the role of knowledge and or research in our modern world, which is characterized by the division of labor, economic expansion, and extremely dynamic change. And he started the argumentation in his lectures, pointing out this cultural phenomenon, which he dubbed Entzauberung, which is disenchantment. And that could be actually a specific feature, characteristic of the modern world, in which when we are doing science from an objective perspective, we are not engaging ourselves in the object of knowledge. We, as researchers, stay out with our emotions, values, aspiration, you name it. Even though as researchers belonging to groups of human individuals, we have emotions, aspirations, we need recognition from the part of our peers and so on and so forth. But when we do science, we have to leave out that part which pertains to our subjectivity. So, according to the way Weber phrased this phenomenon, disenchantment consists in an objective process through which science and technology had necessarily uprooted magical thinking. And mind the fact that this is a process. Even the best scholars and researchers still have some remnants of magical thinking. Okay? Because actually we are not automata which are programmed to solve some problems. But by the same token, this disenchantment, which mirrors the division of labor in science, in what we are concerned here, this disenchantment brought about a fragmentalization of the sciences in the academia. So the dynamics of the science was the one which sort of acted against transdisciplinarity and interdisciplinarity. So the very essence of how we are doing this kind of activity was the triggering factor for specialization, which is a sort of factor which hinders easy transdisciplinarity and interdisciplinarity. But once we reached that point, the feeling was that we lost the science as a whole. The picture that, I don't know, Aristotle had in ancient Greece or Thomas Aquinas had in Middle Age and so on and so forth. And we also feel that those ages are gone forever. We cannot claim that we can have another Thomas Aquinas or another Pico della Mirandola. It is not feasible, it is not doable, and it should not be an aspiration to have that kind of encyclopedic outlook. Now, as opposed to that, if you look at the dialectics of disenchantment, fragmentalization on the one hand, and the aspiration for transdisciplinarity and interdisciplinarity on the other hand. You have those forces which should be kept in a sort of balance. So if you look at the same thing from the other perspective, one very interesting metaphor that famous American philosopher, who actually was trained as a mathematician in the beginning, Harvard professor, who worked for 50 years at Harvard University, Willard Van Orman Quine, came up with this metaphor of the knowledge as the web of belief. And when he came up with this metaphor, we didn't have the World Wide Web, which is again a sort of metaphor, similar metaphor coming nowadays from technology, firstly, and not from philosophy. So Quine, I guess, could very aptly catch this idea that the unit of the meaningful knowledge is the whole of science. And he developed this philosophy which is called holism, Greek word which means sort of whole thing. I mean, in English also have this adjective having the root in Greek. So holism, which has two aspects, epistemic holism and meaning holism. Just a few words about those two visions which are very much in the background of this vision about transdisciplinarity and interdisciplinarity. By epistemic holism, we mean that if we have a science that we can somehow classify, okay? We have mathematics, we have physics, we have chemistry, we have some domains which are in between, like biophysics, biochemistry, which is now in itself a science, okay? And we need to assess, to check whether or not some models, some sentences, some inferences that we are doing within those sciences are correct, are corresponding to a reality which is out there. One idea that we could have is that we single out a sentence or a bunch of sentences and we compare those sentences with the outcome of some experiments, experimental results. Well, Quine developed a very complex and nuanced philosophy in which he very convincingly, at least to my own mind, argued that we cannot do that way. Because in order to give content and an empiric meaning to our sentences in science, we have to look at the connections, the various connections that those sentences have with many other sentences which do not belong only to our own science. So we might have some sentences coming from mathematics, even though we work in biology. Then we might have some principles, some presuppositions which are examined by philosophers and so on and so forth. So it is not in principle possible to single out, like, I don't know, picking up this thing and saying, okay, this is okay because I can compare this with some reality. Because this thing is in connection, is an environment with many other things. And in order to individuate the content of this thing, I have to take into consideration that whole area of interconnections that the sentence is having with many other sentences. Likewise with meaning holism. Okay? The meaning of a word, the meaning of a sentence is what that sentence contributes to a whole language and to a whole culture of a society. It's not just picking up a word and giving a definition using some synonyms. And by the way, Quine actually was criticizing the very idea of synonymy. I mean, he gave arguments that synonymy is a flawed concept. So the whole idea that is emerging from this vision is that when we think in a broader perspective about science, we see that even though from a sociological and institutional perspective we need specialization, but the science gives explanation and gives meanings and understanding, provided it is seen in a broader perspective, not in a very specialized and atomized way. In a paper that I'm quoting here, actually, Quine also kept the spirit of this tension between specialization and interdisciplinarity, making a sort of joke. I mean, actually, he doesn't make that joke in this way. I was the one who extracted that joke. You are going to see the exact quote. But the spirit of the interdisciplinarity in this Quinian joke was that who benefits mostly from this rigid compartmentalization are the deans of the schools and the librarians. Why the deans? Because the deans are going to the presidents, to the provosts, to the rectors, and are saying, we need money because we do not have substances, we do not have equipment, we do not have that and that. Okay? And what we are doing is very important. You do that, I was doing that as the dean of the philosophy school and so on and so forth, and it's quite understandable from a sociological perspective. Why the librarians? Again, because we need a classification of the books. If we put the books randomly on bookshelves, then we cannot find them when we need them. So the strict classification actually is a sort of instrument that we need in order to solve some practical problems. Whereas, Quine points out, the real knowledge in science doesn't reciprocate. Even though we advance science on our side, on this front, then we now and then need the perspective of some other colleagues of ours who happen to work in a different field or from a different perspective. So the question that Quine raised were, is the strict classification of the sciences mirroring a natural, essential distinction between them? Like, for instance, does mathematics or physics or whatever have an essence which preserves the purity of their individuality? Well, it seems not, at least according to Quine. And of course, there is room for disagreement. If you look back at some mathematicians, and even now, okay, look, for instance, at a mathematician at the beginning of the 20th century in Oxford or in Cambridge, Littlewood, for instance. Okay? For them, it was only pure mathematics. And if you go out and you apply mathematics in physics or biology or sociology, that's not any longer science. Mathematics is number theory, maybe analysis, maybe a bit of logic, some geometry, and that's it. Pure, genuine, essential mathematics. That was the vision that they had back then, and many people could have that vision even now. There again, Quine asked, to what extent the classification of disciplines and the system of naming them is just a lexical issue, a conventional issue? Is naming a discipline of the essence of grasping the very nature of that discipline? If I am labeling your discipline biophysics, and I might have some more minute labels, more fine labels, is that naming of the disciplines of the essence of your discipline? Is that naming revealing the features, the essential features of what you are doing? Well, hardly so. Because naming is just a sociological tool which is kind of conventional. And here you have the code, which is taken from this short paper on Austin's method in Theories and Things, Harvard University Press, 1981. Who was this gentleman, Austin? A very influential Oxford philosopher who worked in the area of speech acts and ordinary language philosophy, which is a branch of analytic philosophy. Okay, I'm not going to go into that. Now, the quote, philosophy is a heterogeneous set of inquiries. I applaud this casual attitude, italics mine, toward the demarcation of disciplines. Names of disciplines should be seen only as technical aids in the organization of curricula and libraries. This is where I'm actually getting that joke, okay? So in the organization of curricula and libraries, a scholar is better known by the individuality of his or her problems than by the name of his or her discipline. If these librarians class some of his or her problems as philosophical, that is no reason for him or her to be concerned with other problems that they class as philosophical. His or her further concerns might just as well be problems that are classed as linguistic or mathematical. And he ends this passage. For that matter, naming disciplines even fosters philosophical error. To take the most glaring case, why do people insist on viewing all parts of physics, however theoretical, as in some degree empirical, and all parts of mathematics, however practical, as purely formal?
You know that division between mathematical sciences, which are formal, and some philosophers are saying that mathematics is not a science, it's the language of sciences. But mathematics, well, it has a domain, but the domain are abstract entities, not real things, physical things. And on the other hand, you have mathematics applied in understanding, measuring, making predictions about phenomena in real world or in society. And those are natural sciences. But mind the fact that philosophers are not speaking about exact sciences, because natural sciences are not exact, are approximations, whereas mathematics, which is very exact, is not a science. So actually you don't have exact sciences. That's a misnomer about classification of things. Yeah, you may have actually some arguments against them with that mathematics is not a science.
As a biologist, I mean so.
Okay. So no such contrast with the merged sentence by sentence. Again, the holistic model that I mentioned before, or problem by problem, without reference to the nominal demarcation of disciplines. So if we have this sort of illusion that we can sort out sentences and assess them one by one, that is due to the fact that we classify them, we give names to them, but that's only a nominal and instrumental attitude. It's not something which pertains to the essence of the things. Now, following this suggestion of Professor Quine, I'm afraid that I'm going to give only the first third of the lecture because of the time. So, going further with this suggestion of Professor Quine, what would be the real issues and problems which would put a pressure on us as a community to go more and more with interdisciplinarity and transdisciplinarity? When are we going to feel that we do not have enough resources, and I don't mean money or technology, we do not have enough conceptual resources from within our own fields in order to address those important issues, not philosophical, metaphysical issues, real, life and death issues, such that we become aware and acknowledge that we need each other, not in a sort of propagandistic way, but in a real, deep way. And I'm sure that you gave more than a thought about those questions, because those are the challenges that we have in the 21st century and that we leave to our children and grandchildren. Like for instance, and this is how I phrase the questions because my intention here was to show what social sciences and humanities could provide at this table. How are you going to frame the conceptual scheme of the relationships between science, truth, and democracy? We live by and large in a democratic society. We do science in societies, not in the ivory towers. And we know what democracy could lead in a way of populistic way, and how could that erode the ethos of real knowledge and truth. I don't want to offend anyone, but after all, we lived only after 2 years after the Trump administration, who spoke about alternative facts, alternative truth, and things of that sort. So those are real issues, are not invented by me. What is the role that science plays in a democratic society? Are the standard, traditional values of the objective scientific knowledge compatible with the political values and norms of democracy? Could the norms of democratic institutions ground the ethos of our claims of objective knowledge, which should be subjected to the close scrutiny of facts? How is it possible and feasible to integrate scientific knowledge with democratic values? What is the role that experts and their evidence-based expertise are playing in a context in which the rhetoric of the public discourse emphasizes in an obsessive manner the concept that everybody, be it an expert or a layperson, is entitled, not that he or she expresses some or voices some opinions, but he or she is entitled, has the right, which is very strong, to an equal, is entitled to an equal right to hold his or her opinions or beliefs, regardless of whether or not he or she complies with the epistemic norms of rationality and of scientific reasoning that we have to abide by and to obey. Unless we do that, we cannot publish our stuff. So the standards that we're observing are much higher than the standards of the public discourse. Should the dictum, your ignorance is worth the same as my expert opinion, or maybe the other way around, the dictum, my ignorance is worth the same as your expert opinion, be an inevitable consequence of the dissolution of the role of the experts. And here I have to apologize on behalf of my own trade, my own field, because philosophers were the ones who in the last 50 years pushed into this direction of relativism, extreme relativism, in which, as Paul Feyerabend put, everything goes. If I'm having some opinions and you have proofs, doesn't matter. They are on equal footing. And how did we get to that point? Because actually we question the idea of objective facts, of methods, and the idea that we could actually somehow, luckily, get to the truth of the matter. And that was actually, unfortunately, the role that a humanist had. How is the contemporary scientific establishment defending the epistemic authority of scientific knowledge against the assault of indiscriminate opinions? Have we already reached that critical stage of a methodological anarchism which Paul Feyerabend triumphantly encapsulated into the dictum "anything goes"? And by the way, Feyerabend was a physicist, a pupil of Karl Popper. But he turned into this kind of relativistic, nonchalant person, very charismatic, who in the 70s actually worked very hard to erode this ethos of science that we got from Galileo, from Newton, from the other great figures. And not in the end, how dangerous is this critical condition of a fast-growing public mistrust in the authority of science and the truth of facts and of the objective and impersonal rules of the empirical methods of science. Okay. Now the second section of the presentation. What gets in the way of interdisciplinary across the board with the humanities who are part of disciplines? And here I'm going to give you a sort of summary in the interest of time. There are some intrinsic factors which are objective, and also there are some other institutional and more subjective factors. The intrinsic factors, of course, deal with the reality that philosophy or, I don't know, the humanities are having their own object of study, which is completely different from logical physics, biology, chemistry. So it's quite natural then to live in our own bubbles, epistemic bubbles. But when we get to universities, to academia, when we are together, it seems that quite often we cannot get across our message. We cannot communicate well. For one thing, very good scientific researchers are not very good at communicating their own results, making them understood for the general public who is educated and who might have very good heart and would want to understand things. And on the other hand, there is this kind of arrogant attitude of the humanists, people working on the humanities, who say, what do you know about human condition, about history, about values, about whatever? You are not intellectuals. You people who work in engineering or in physics. The intellectuals are the literati. I mean, did you read Homer? Or I don't know. Well, hopefully and happily, the new generation of humanists are not going into that direction. This kind of attitude in which they are looking down to people in engineering is something of the past, I would say, especially with the generation of my students. But well, you never know, because this kind of movement could replicate. I, for example, I was extremely, literally crushed when I was many years ago in Houston, Texas, actually in Galveston, at NASA Museum. And I saw in a movie theater, sort of multiplex, they had that way back in 1993, they showed us how a rocket is launched. And it was as if I was there, inside the whole thing. Because the theater was going to tremble while the rocket was shown being launched and everything. And I thought, well, those engineers, those fellows could assemble that marvelous piece of engineering, and then they launched it. And they know that, I don't know, in 53 days, that piece of steel is going to hit the moon. That's mind-boggling. Something that a philosopher cannot do in his own field. And in the last part of my presentation, that I'm going now to give some hints about, actually my argument is that part of the problems that we have nowadays, and problems that require this kind of transdisciplinarity and interdisciplinarity, is that we are better at doing things, managing and manipulating objects. We are better engineers than philosophers and ethicists. So ethics and philosophy lags behind. And we cannot adapt and adjust easier to the new environment, to the new situations, whereas what we do in order to solve practical problems is indeed marvelous sometimes. I mean, look, for instance, they could develop the vaccine for the COVID in half a year. Of course, they worked very hard. You told me that they have been working on this concept like in the last 20 years, but they really did it in less than 6 months. They solved that problem for everyone. And in this regard, I am referring to the work of a very important American contemporary philosopher, Philip Kitcher, who is a very good expert in evolutionary theory as well. He worked on Darwin. And he worked on many other projects, amongst which there is this ethical project. And the basic idea is that in all that we are doing, in science, in society, in politics, there is a sort of metaphysical and epistemological aspect which lies in the background of this project. And it has to do with our species being constantly involved in normative and value judgment in each and every aspect of our lives. And this gentleman, Kitcher, very aptly called this the ethical project of the human beings. Building knowledge, building science is part of this project. It's part of what society put you to do in order to develop this ethical project that might be unacknowledged by human beings. This process of valuing different political and social contexts stems from the human practices which go way back and were key factors for our ancestors' involvement in this ethical project which consolidated the structure of their society. This is a never-ending project which unfolds with each and every generation. Being a political species, as we are, all these require the capacity for altruism in our ancestors. So we compete with each other or against each other, but we need altruism in order to stay together as a political species. And that's the tension and the dialectics. But what should prevail is this form of altruism in which we acknowledge the other because we need them. Well, by the way, Margaret Mead, a very famous American anthropologist, when was asked once by a student who was, in her opinion, the beginning of human civilization, she said that it was when a broken bone was healed. Because if an animal gets a broken bone, he dies. He cannot compete, he cannot eat, he cannot run, and so on and so forth. But a human being with a broken bone, which afterwards got healed, shows that someone else took care of it. So this is the kind of thing that I have in mind in some case. The whole dialectics which is going on here raises an extremely controversial issue. Is there any substantial role for the layperson to play in the process of science validation and simplification? Like, for instance, for myself. Am I having any role to play in what we are doing? To this question, one may answer in different ways. We can answer negatively, of course. You can say, no, you don't have any role, Mr. because you are not a biophysicist. And that's quite understandable. But that will make it extremely difficult to get a compatibility solution to the issue of the relationship between democracy and general science. If you reject, in principle, the role that the layperson could have in your own field. Then one may answer in the affirmative, and this solution comes in degree. Ideally, the affirmative answer should not end up in an irresponsible and epistemophobic kind of relativism, like the one that I mentioned in relation to Paul Feyerabend, anything goes. The radical affirmative answer is one of the kind famously put forward, others like myself would say infamously, by philosopher Paul Feyerabend. He claims that one should introduce democratic mechanisms into the very processes of science certification. And those are his own words. It would not only be foolish but downright irresponsible to accept the judgment of scientists and physicians without further examination. If the matter is important either to a small group or to society as a whole, then this judgment must be subjected to the most painstaking scrutiny. Duly elected committees of laymen must examine whether the theory of evolution is really as well established as biologists want us to believe, whether being established in their sense settles the matter, and whether it should replace other views in schools. That was the debate about evolution in the States. We can change the example about COVID. Duly elected committees of journalists should put to scrutiny what you are doing in order to come up with a vaccine. That's ridiculous. That's indeed ridiculous. Now, for me, it is obvious that this radical solution won't do. It cannot work either at the jure solution or at the facto solution. And it is quite natural that when scientists, scholars, and philosophers of science emphasize the importance of scientific research being done in an autonomous way, they fear the worst from this kind of methodological anarchism advocated by Paul Feyerabend. Their anxiety to the mob rule is motivated by their reasonable reaction against the anything goes motto of Paul Feyerabend. Well, coming thus far to this point, this is why I find very appealing and I applaud Philip Kitcher's attitude in this regard. And I'm quoting from Kitcher. Many people, especially scientists, react to a plea for democracy with alarm. Part of the fear stems from suspicions that democratization, even in the guise of a well-ordered science, this is Kitcher's proposal, well-ordered science, will submit research to the tyranny of ignorance. This is a very apt phrase. We sort of live in a tyranny of ignorance. And we are small islands which actually should forge some ties with them in order to defend the establishment of science. It is worth repeating that well-ordered science is deliberately designed to overcome this problem of the tyranny of ignorance, that it imposes stringent cognitive conditions and that it assigns an important role to the authority of experts. Moreover, scientific autonomy, like that of other agents, covers many spheres of activity, and it is important to understand just which of these might be threatened. Very likely, the image of the autonomous scientist is a residue of the original commitment to private activity embodied in the gentleman's club of the early modern period, no longer apt when science, with big S, has become central to the public knowledge system. We cannot do any longer science in a gentleman's club, because we are already in the whole society, part of the society. And for me, this is a more balanced view, because the idea of a well-ordered science seems more appealing. The advancement of science depends on constant good epistemic and methodological decisions. And it goes without saying that the experts are the most important and effective decision makers. However, the humanities are supposed to have a fair share in this public debate. Public debate, not telling you what to do, but setting up the stage for the debate. Again, Kitcher, these important characteristics of responsible decision-making, both in balancing our own lives and in joint activities with those about whom we care, are reflected more precisely in the conditions of mutual engagement. And those conditions yield my ideal of well-ordered science. A society practicing scientific inquiry is well-ordered just in case, this is a kind of definition, it assigns priorities to lines of investigations through discussions, whose conclusions are those that would be reached through deliberation under mutual engagement and which expose the grounds such deliberation would present. So when it comes to grounds, philosophers are important to that. So maybe I'm supposed to end on this note? Yeah, good idea.
Fantastic. Actually, thank you very much. Very exciting lecture. I understood that the initial way I was thinking about this topic was clearly too narrow. And we need, besides various disciplines, which in my mind were pretty much related to the core of science, hard science, we may need philosophers as well to show that, well, the puzzle is much more complex than I had initially in mind. And the key word, I like very much the way you get towards the end. It's not solving thing, not closing thing, but start the debate on the matter. Thank you very much. Well, we're pretty much in, a little bit of a hurry, but
I should ask Professor for an opinion, because everybody from here are doing pictures. We are looking to cells, to atoms, to molecules, to interface, and so on. We have a question, what we are doing with these pictures? And let's say, in connection with a subject which is in a debate today about the influence, for example, of Wittgenstein on artificial intelligence. I mean, artificial intelligence are working only with picture at this moment, or mainly with pictures. Do you think that the build or a picture or the image will replace our language, or will be a general language for science in the future?
I'm totally favor with the presupposition of the question, because I don't think that images will replace language, because language is an image, which is not very well refined. I mean, the natural language is very well, communication and many other things. It's a social institution. But I'm supporting the semantic view that language is representational, as images are. So this kind of image theory that Wittgenstein had in Tractatus about how language works, especially symbolic languages in his case, is the very essence of the thing. So I wouldn't say that visual models or images are going to replace the language, because language in its essence is a sort of representing and imaging things. So what would you have in mind when we say that images would replace language?
One of the main problems, for example, with the education of young scientists is that they cannot express what they are seeing.
Well, there is
or then everybody now cut the words and they are looking only to the pictures.
Well, let me give you a sort of biological metaphor. Language is like a muscle. I'm having muscles on my skeleton, but if I'm not working, then they are going to be very feeble. Likewise with the language, and there is a remedy for that. Read literature, read poetry, read whatever.
So this is why humanities are fundamental for science.
Of course, if you do not develop that capability when you are in primary or in secondary school, it's very hard afterwards to use language in order to convince people or to develop their ideas. And that's actually the role of the school. It's a bit hard, late when engineers are coming and they cannot speak about it, but they are doing.
It's so much frustrating that, I don't know, even if I would have think of extending this symposium for about 3 weeks, it clearly wouldn't be enough. So again, this is another example that during this symposium, it is no way to close problems, but to add some open issues for discussion. I don't know. During night times, perhaps, I don't know, in my case. But nevertheless, well, I'm feeling very happy that we could do this. Hopefully, I don't know if we will be able to change too many things around, but I think that this is a extremely, let's say, magic, I would say, example that, well, we can feel comfortable discussing with people which are not identical, which are, well, somehow dealing with different languages, but it is a must to get together and understand that, well, we can understand each other, and actually the problems that we thought that are just ours, are shared by various other disciplines in perhaps other languages, but our mind is well, quite open to, and I think it's also needed to take various point of views on this fantastic issue, which is the reality, which really has much more dimension than we as individuals can simplify, do simplify because of various reasons. Thank you so very much.
Okay, thank you.
Coffee break.
It's even better than other.
we can start now with the last session, and it is new approaches to support cell-based biosensing. I like this title of the session, where I am also the chairman, because using the cell as a biosensor is probably, at the first glance, looks very complex. But on the other hand, if you think that the cells in our body are doing so many different things in such high precision level, with very little energy and very small volume, then I think this is probably the ideal sensor that one can design, which nature did during the evolution. So, keeping that in mind, now we will have 6 presentations, and I would like to invite the first speaker, who will present the portable surface plasma resonance system for blood marker analysis supporting rapid point-to-care diagnostics and treatment monitoring. Christina, and you can pronounce your name maybe better than I.
Polonsky.
Please. So we have about 20 minutes, but we should be a little bit flexible, I suppose, and there will be some questions. Okay. So maybe I give you just a sign for like 3 minutes before the end.
Good morning. Thank you for the introduction. So I will talk about this portable SPR system that we developed here at the International Center of Biodynamics. Well, currently, blood biomarkers are analyzed in specialized laboratories by expensive and time-consuming procedure, which make them unsuitable for life-threatening situations, such as in case of sepsis. This is why we developed this novel point-of-care system that we named MarkerSense for fast and sensitive detection of biomarkers in blood. This system is based on a proprietary SPR technology developed by us, and also on a low-cost functionalization platform, which was optimized for high sensitivity and reduced non-specific binding. This point-of-care system is able to simultaneously perform high signal-to-noise ratio, both reflectivity and phase angle assays, in a portable format, of course. The system is based on the following optical scheme, where we have this light source, which can be laser or also an LED, and this light is polarized and then collimated using this objective, and then will pass through a variable liquid crystal retarder, which will provide 3 retardation for the SPR phase assays. And this is the proprietary SPR technology developed by us, which is able to provide these reflective surfaces and deliver the waves to the this focusing objective and the analyzer on the video camera. We use as SPR phase calculation a polarimetry approach, where we have this interference of by combining the 2 orthogonally polarized components, P and S, of the light wave by means of a polarizer, and we will determine the relative phase difference by analyzing series of intensity measurements captured with the known phase shifts between them by the means of the variable retarder. This is the preliminary experimental setup that we use, and you have here the exact optical pieces that I introduced them in the scheme before. And another important part of this system is optical coupling of the sensor chip to the SPR prism. For this, you have 2 possibilities: either to use an optical matching oil or gels, which has a similar index of refraction as the glass of the SPR sensor chip and of the SPR prism. Or we could use a solid state approach where we have a difference in refractive index, but is calibrated, and it is also able to provide very good results, as you can see here. Using this system, we obtain some preliminary results. As my colleague talked about yesterday in his poster, first we have to do this calibration and obtain the pixel incidence angle. And then, after we obtain this correspondence, we can then perform reflectivity measures on a standard gold SPR chip. And this is the reflectivity curve that we obtained for two different solutions, two different refractive indexes. And this is the transfer matrix fit of the curve, and you see very good agreement between experimental and theory. For the phase calculations, as I said before, we need 3 successive measurements for 3 different retardations, and then we obtain the SPR phase curve, and it's also compared to the theory with the transfer matrix, and you see very good agreement. And also this system is capable to provide parallel sensing areas. I mean, on a single sensor chip you have multiple channels. So this is where we measure the SPR phase for each channel, and it is superimposed also with the theory, and it's also in very good agreement. For the microfluidic system, we opted to use a piezoelectric micropump because of the size, of course. And this is a control board and flow sensor. You cannot use it without it. And also we have the SPR flow cell mounted on top of the compact optical system. And everything is mounted on a cage-like system. If you are familiar with Tolax, they provide this very nice system. And in the end, this is the miniaturized version of the system that I showed you previously. And here, this integrates everything from the light source, polarizer, collimation objective, the retarder. This is the compact SPR system with the flow chamber on top, and of course the SPR sensor, collection objective, analyzer, and of course another objective to focus on the video camera that is connected to the computer via USB 3.0. Of course we have the power supply and the control module for the fluidics, and for the variable retarder and the light source. Okay. We also developed this interface for the control, acquisition, and analysis program. Of course, in that view, you are familiar to it, and it is user-friendly, and it allows to control these components of the system and to save the data and to visualize the required data in real time. This is the SPR sensor chip, and for this we had to also develop a chip holder with the mount guides in order to mount them on top of the SPR compact system. And these are the sensing areas that I was talking about before. And of course this is the microfluidic channel defined on top of it. And this is the holder that is 3D printed. Then another part of the SPR sensor is the functionalization part. I mean, you have to functionalize the gold surface in order to immobilize then the ligands. So for this, we use this BSA cross-linked protein film that we previously developed, and it is really easy to manufacture. You have to incubate the Gauss surface with this BSA and the EDC NHS solution, and then you wash it, and then you add more carboxylic ends by means of the succinic anhydride. This functionalization platform was also compared to a commercially available carboxymethyldextrane from Vifor, and we functionalized this sensor with the CDSA, and then we immobilized the aptamer for thrombin on both CDSA and CN5, and then we injected thrombin in plasma in a series of concentration between 0.1 and 150 nanomolar, and we obtained these calibration curves, and these are the limit of detection. Of course, we have to relate them to the density of the ligand immobilized. We have a lower density in case of the BSA because this is not a three-dimensional matrix, but still we obtain a very good limit of detection. So based on the data that we obtained with this study, we can conclude that this CBSA APT sensor can exhibit good selectivity, stability, and also regeneration ability in the complex matrices such as plasma, and very comparable to the CM5 platform. This is an example of a sensor chip that we manufacture in the nanoplotter, and we immobilized here several spots of BSA solution. They have different diameters because we use different volumes. This is the system measuring this exact chip, and we obtained these results using these various volumes of BSA solutions, and as you can see, we can clearly distinguish the spots almost at every volume of solution, of every diameter of the spots. Then we proceeded to detect biomarkers in blood. For this, we choose promising biomarkers for sepsis, early detection of sepsis, which is the soluble CD25 receptor for interleukin 2. And here you have this immobilization of the ligand on the functionalized platform, the ligand being an antibody for this marker. And then we tested the sensor in serum, and we also injected the marker in serum or in buffer. And here are the curves that we obtained. And as you can see, after the serum injection, after we have this buffer effect, the baseline returns to the initial value before the injection, which means that the functionalization platform has very low non-specific response. And then here, when you see this injection of this marker in serum, you just have to subtract from this one the injection in serum, and you have basically the injection only of the biomarker in buffer. And we obtain this calibration curve with a limit of detection of 2 nanograms per milliliter, which is in good agreement with the limit also reported in literature. And in conclusions, We have developed a compact and portable SPR system, which is able to provide both angle result curves for reflectivity and phase. This is a means to boost the sensitivity of analyte detection. We also developed this solid-state refractive index matching surface for optical coupling, which is working pretty good. A user-friendly acquisition and analysis software, because when you want to have well-deployed portable system, you need to act really quickly and to have this really easy-to-use interfaces. And we also developed this multiplex SPR sensing chip, which is also optimized for high sensitivity and, of course, reduced non-specific binding, which is really important for analysis in complex matrices. For future development, we plan to further miniaturize the system and to use it in conjunction with a smartphone, and maybe to, after following some other studies, to even use them in emergency centers, hospitals for patients. So this is it. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. If you please have some questions, if anybody, or comments, please.
Sorry, I'm Bogdan. What is the, I mean, did you compare your method to something standard that we use like procalcitonin? Procalcitonin is the most used, let's say, biomarker for the detection of sepsis.
Yeah, also CRP can be used, but it's
No, the procalcitonin is more specific than CRP.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Well, this work here, this scientists, they use pancreatic stone protein and this soluble CD25 for sepsis. Also, there are studies that are comparing these two markers also with procalcitonin, and they are very promising also.
I mean, it's similar sensitivity and specificity, or, because that's very relevant. I mean, if you produce a new biomarker which is not better than the currently used one, then probably will not succeed. And the other question is, does this CD25 catches all type of bacterial infection or?
I don't know this. I will have to investigate.
But that's also very relevant because Yes, thank you.
Any other? Yes, please, on the back.
If I may add something to your question, I think that this cellular receptor is not an early marker of sepsis. Procalcitonin is better as an early marker, but I think that CD25 is very important to appreciate the severity of sepsis. This is very important. And also, it is a very important marker for the chronic inflammatory diseases. And I think that having this simple method of detecting CD25 will be very good in the future. So congratulations.
I have a suggestion for that. It appears to me here what we discussed also yesterday, specificity is very important on one hand. On the other hand, the number of different markers, I mean, it's like in the tumors. So you would like to analyze as many as possible biomarkers because it will give you better diagnostic picture. That's what you mentioned. So can you use in your system, like with one drop of the blood, have just when you have several of these and get to the curves? Is that possible?
Yes,
what
something like this we would like to do in the future. I mean,
but with the different markers on the same chip.
Yeah, on the same chip, because our chip allows simultaneous.
That's right. So that's how I understood it.
Yeah.
So, and I have a. Is there any other question, please? Then I.
Yes, go ahead.
No, it was connected with that. Just I wanted to know the concentration level, and because you have a multi-chip, I mean, you could dilute also your ligand as well as the blood. That's more complicated, but that will give you the kinetic curves.
We don't need to dilute anything because we have here a single channel and
Okay.
the sample will
Will
pass
pass through all of them, okay.
them, so you don't have to split the sample.
Okay,
So, yeah.
can you just go back, go forward for the concentration curves?
Yeah.
I don't know if,
This-
that one or the one before?
Yeah, but that one is for thrombin.
Ah, okay,
So
okay,
this
good.
is for the CD25.
Okay, good, okay, I misunderstood, please.
Yeah, just two comments. One is related to the lecture presented by Professor Dumitru. I think that what we need clearly, I was just making an exercise of imagination. What if we should have, let's say, some time, couple of hours, days, interaction with someone from marketing, from communication. Clearly, the presentation, including mine, would have been completely different. And audience could, well, get it in a different way. So perhaps we should think of getting together in making the presentations just able to be digested by a larger audience. I think that would be a good point. The other one is related to why we're doing this. We are doing this because I would just like to emphasize from the patient perspective. Okay, I'm not feeling good. All right. And the medical doctor say, okay, I don't know what you have. Let's have a drop of blood, and well, you are susceptible to have sepsis. Next step is, okay, let's try to find the cure, because actually what we will eventually need. And the next step is related to what we have outside. So a device able to capture the pathogens and perform quite rapidly the antibiotic susceptibility testing in order to find the cure in about a couple of hours to give the patient the right treatment. So this is the circle we were considered, and what Christina did was fantastic because it was a challenge. There were several challenges in terms of analytics, how to get to pretty low limit of detections, able to provide information about what type of, if there is a sepsis, what will be the source. It could be bacterial, fungi, viral. So because you know very well, there are various types of biomarkers able to emphasize in their concept what the cause could be. But again, I think that what we need, according to the lecture before, we would need to interact more with people outside our community in order to make things, let's say, able to attract wider attention. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. So there is one more question.
So Christina, you talk about miniaturization. So do you think that these systems can be transformed into wearables? Because yeah, I mean, you know, we have investors, we know a bit of some parts, so then we can make them. So what do you think it would be the biggest challenge to transform it in a portable, wearable device on the hand?
Well, I think it's a really big challenge because it depends on the size of the optical component that we use. So we have to further miniaturize them, all of them, and maybe use some synthetic polymers to produce them to be not made by glass, but by some polymers, some plastics, which are very cheap to produce, and I don't know, maybe change the whole idea, the whole concept entirely, and use fiber optics approach, something like this, which is even more miniaturized than this. I don't know. We can think further to develop this thing. Yeah.
Anybody else? If not, thank you very much for doing that. And we will come to our second presentation. Quantifying drug uptake in single bacterial cells. So, Katalin Kimara, or Chimara. It's always challenging in international one to have a right pronunciation. Please.
Yes. I've added a word here, 2 words in my small actually this. First of all, I would like to start by thanking the organizers for this great meeting, and I'm very grateful for being here. And yes, today I'm going to speak about cavity-enhanced absorption spectroscopy, and I've also added about a few slides about functional cell sorting, but we'll see how time goes. So, why cavity-enhanced absorption spectroscopy? The reason why this is actually to study, one example, to study drug transport across membrane, or better said, antibiotic transport across membranes. And here, I want to give you an example of why drug transport is important. Obviously, we had during the conference examples of actually sensitivity and bacterial sensitivity to antibiotics, but actually the mechanisms of antibiotic resistance are equally important. And here I'm showing you an electron microscopy picture of a gram-negative bacteria, and I think most of you in the audience here know that gram-negative bacteria has 2 layers of protections against antibiotics. First is the outer membrane, which is basically a molecular sheath, and then is the inner membrane. The outer membrane is filled with pores, such as this. This is a trimeric pore, so it doesn't have 1 channel, but 3 channels. It's called OMPF. And for an antibiotic from the extracellular space to go into the intracellular space, it needs to pass through this molecular sheath. And this is a great source of resistance to antibiotics. Because, for example, Pseudomonas aeruginosa has 30 types of pores in its genetic library, and these pores can be expressed on the surface of the bacteria as it's needed. So if you feed one antibiotic, it will put a pore outside there that doesn't let this antibiotic pass through. So understanding the way to design antibiotics that can permeate through these pores can help us untangle the problem of antibiotic resistance. So I have studied antibiotic transport through membranes in different contexts. I have studied antibiotic transport directly to the porins, and I have also used model systems such as liposomes. These are giant liposomes. Please note the scale bar. This is 10 micrometers, so this from here to here is about 40 micrometers. And what we have done, we have put also pores in these liposomes. So we have used fluorescent antibiotics to measure, actually to quantify the transport from the outside of the liposome to the inside of the liposomes. But actually, the key problem is not to use a model system like this, but to actually directly quantify the antibiotic transport inside the bacteria. So we want to have a method that can tell me directly how many molecules of antibiotics are present inside a bacteria. A little bit on my previous work of transport through bacterial porins. So for this type of work, the method of choice is kind of electrophysiology, but it's electrophysiology in a very specific context. So what we are having a planar lipid membrane painted in a Teflon hole that separates 2 water chambers. And then what we are doing, we are measuring the current that goes through this lipid membrane. Well, actually, there is not much current going through a lipid membrane as such, because this is a gigasil. But when we are putting a pore in here, which you don't see because I haven't represented it graphically, this pore corresponds to a current going through this. So in the absence of the pore, the current stays on 0, and when you have a pore inserting here, the current increases. Now, if you then add antibiotics in the systems here, so antibiotic in the aqueous phase, you start to see blockades when the pore goes to the, when the antibiotic goes to the pore. You know that these blockades are actually corresponding to 1/3 of the total current magnitude, and this is because the pore is a trimer. So it is only a monomer that you are closing, not the whole pore. And you can see here what we have done in order to probe this interaction energy between the pore and the antibiotic. We have done a temperature dependence. So we have measured the antibiotic translocation at different temperatures, starting from 5 degrees to 55 degrees. We can do even higher temperature. We can go to almost the boiling point of water, and this on-path pores, this outer membrane pore, still remains stable. But for studying the antibiotic kinetics through the pore, this is enough, and you will see why this is enough. Now, we are plotting the number of events per second, so the number of blockades per second as a function of temperature. This is proportional to the rate of passing over this energy barrier of enters, this K on, and you see that there is an exponential dependence. You can see there are two behaviors here. First, the first behavior is that the number of events increases with temperature, and then it starts to decrease. Actually, the reason of this decrease is non-physiological in a way. It is because we are not capturing these events, because the frequency of our amplifier goes down, and it's limited, and we can't capture these fast events. But if you are looking at these kinetics, right, if you plot the logarithm of this rate entrance as a function of 1 over temperature, you can see a very linear dependence. And this tells us that we have an Arrhenius behavior in the system. It's just a simple jump over an energy barrier, and we can actually measure the energy that we need to access the inside of the pore. So depending from which side you enter the pore, you have different access energies that range in the 60 kT and 30 kT. We also have the story of residence time, which is proportional, which is actually determining the rate of the pore, the rate of the antibiotic going out of the pore. This actually doesn't give us information on the flux of antibiotic going on the pore. So it gives us information of how to make the antibiotic better suited to fit inside the pore. So to get information on the flux, actually what we have done, we have built these giant liposomes, and we have used fluorescent antibiotics. So there is a class of antibiotics for fluoroquinolones, and these antibiotics have self-interesting fluorescence. So you can monitor the antibiotic label free by monitoring the fluorescence. So we have built this microfluidic device where we are having the vesicles in the absence of antibiotic mixed with the antibiotic itself in this geometry of microfluidic chip, and then so this is the mixing point, this is the time equals 0, and then we are imaging the antibiotic before, and then imaging the liposome after some time of being present. So we are taking snapshots in time, but basically circulating the antibiotic into the microfluidic chip for some distance. And from this, actually, we can get the permeability coefficient for the antibiotic entering the pore, entering the liposome. We are using a model for that. And the permeability coefficient difference in the presence of porins being here and the control. So there is some slight diffusion of the antibiotic directly to the lipid membrane, but when we are putting the pore into the system, the diffusion is much increased. So this was actually my starting point when I set up my lab, and then my goal was, okay, we've done all this nice work, but can we actually measure antibiotic uptake directly into the bacteria? So we have used all these model systems. They are nice, but they have their own limitations. So now there was work in the literature of people doing this, and this is the group of Jean-Marie Pagès in France. And what they have done, actually, they have imaged these fluoroquinolones, as we have done with the liposomes. They have imaged directly the uptake of fluoroquinolones in the bacteria. So here you can see a time lapse of an E. coli uptaking norfloxacin, I think, as a function of time, and you can see that you can measure these uptake curves for these fluorescence antibiotics. But obviously, not all antibiotics and not all drugs are fluorescence. So I said, can we do better than this? Can we come up, I mean, this very much relates to the discussion that we came last night, can we do this label-free? And this was the starting point, and this is, I will show you how I thought and how we thought of doing this. First of all, I mean, there are options there. You can do mass spec, but then you're damaging your bacteria, and then you could do Raman spectroscopy. Raman spectroscopy is a good option. It has a long integration time, but I think with what we've developed, we can also do Raman we will be able to also do Raman spectroscopy in addition to absorbance spectroscopy, and you'll understand that by the end of my talk. So, absorption spectroscopy at the single cell level. So obviously this is nice, it would be very good to be able to do that, but there are challenges. The advantage is actually, as I said, that absorbance is a universal property of matter, is label-free. The challenge is reduced sensitivity, which is actually associated with short optical paths. And then also we have specificity, because absorbance is not that specific, but I think that's not too big because we can normalize to other levels, and actually antibiotics, they have rather high absorption wavelengths. But the biggest problem is the sensitivity. If you tell someone that I'm going to measure an absorbance spectra for an optical path of 1 micrometer or 5 micrometers, the person is going normal, and I think actually I told this once to my supervisors when I was a student, and they said, no, this is utterly impossible. Well, I don't think it's impossible, and I will explain you why. So the strategy is to make a cavity that you bounce, it's basically like a laser cavity. So what you do, you bounce the light in between two mirrors. So basically you don't have a single path going through the bacteria, but you have a multiple passage through the bacteria. There are very good mirrors for this, so there are dielectric mirrors, and they have very high reflectance because actually the number of passages here is proportional to 1 over 1 minus R. This is where R is the reflectance of the mirror. So this is actually the concept of what we want to do. Now, how do you do this? First of all, you don't have to have media in the extracellular space of the bacteria, because then you run into trouble, because actually you're detecting also what you have outside and you can have all sorts of problems. So what I decided to do is we've put optical fiber. So in principle what we do, we use the optical fiber to deliver the light next to our sample. We obviously started without bacteria, we started just with pure solution, and then this is the classic absorption spectrometer, and then we also use the cavity. So basically this is actually the actual experiment with the cavity. So we put a mirror on the back of the fiber and the mirror on the cover slip. These are coatings that you can do, as I showed you there, with very high reflectance. And this is our microscope that we have built. So we have a light source, we have a stage, and then that can align this optical fiber perpendicular to the surface, because otherwise this cavity is not going to function properly. We have a microscope objective actually from Zeiss that is very good in the UV down to 190 nanometer, and the camera here for imaging the light absorbance in this system. This is very much an enlargement of what we do. So one mirror here, and the light bouncing between the two mirrors. So we have started with a drug called amphotericin, which has quite a broad absorption spectrum and is an antifungal drug. Also, we wanted to go to fungal cells first because fungal cells are slightly larger. So they are a good choice because 0.5 microns for bacteria is anyway difficult. So we have made a thin film of 20 micrometers using a 400 micrometer optical fiber with the mirror configurations that I showed you in the previous slide. So we have a mirror here and a mirror here, and the light goes to here. And this is actually what we have achieved. This is for the 20 micrometer thin film. You can see this is the classic absorbance spectra. You barely see this amphotericin peak. And when you're putting the mirrors in place, you see almost 200 times enhancement in absorbance. And then if we make this film even smaller, so instead of 20 micrometer, we make this film of 5 micrometers, we are actually seeing the same level of absorbance because the amplification is larger here. It is larger because the light coming out of the fiber is slightly divergent. So the smaller the gap, the better the cavity we have. And this is great for small samples such as bacteria and very small cells. So now we've done a bit more, we've done a concentration dependence to get basically a cavity enhancement factor to actually quantify how much are we amplifying for over the single pass. I won't bother you too much with this data, but we are seeing cavity enhancement factors that for these 20 micrometers they are in the range of 50 times versus the single pass absorption. So basically we have 50 times more absorbance, and in the case of a 5 micrometer gap, our cavity enhancement factor goes to 200 times versus the single pass absorbance. We have a problem here at low wavelengths. This is the problem because of the monochromator. The monochromator gives us secondary peaks in the diffraction, and these secondary peaks basically are amplified by this filter here, because we have two such filters, a short pass filter, so we have a bit of a problem here, but this can be sorted with monochromatic light sources. And I think, yeah, so if you get rid of the monochromator, you won't see it there, but the amplification in principle ranges from 280 nanometer to 450 nanometers. So this is actually the stage that we have reached. We have reduced this Z dimension to bacterial size. We can go down, we have, so I don't have the data here, but we can go down to 1 micrometer. We can reduce this Z dimension so we can come close to bacteria. Now what we need to do, we need to reduce also the X and Y so that you actually have single cell specificity. At the moment we can measure biofilms, and this is the next stage of my research, to put biofilms in and measure single cells. And a bit to give you a flavor of what we kind of want to do in the future, we want to shrink the optical fiber by pulling it like a pipette, so that we bring it to single size cells. And then also we plan to make cavities inside of the optical fiber, so that basically we have a microscope with a pipette on the surface, and you can engulf cells and do the single cell cavity enhanced absorption microscopy. And now if I have enough time, I can also show you something else that we have developed in my lab. This is a functional cell sorter. This is another toy that we are building. The functional cell sorter, this is completely different. So this is just, actually it's not completely different. This has stemmed from this experiment here, that we are measuring these liposomes at different time points in a microfluidic flow. So I wanted to do the same with cells. So I said, okay, all the flow cytometry is measuring cells at one single point in time. I want to measure cells at more than one single point in time so that I can quantify changes in fluorescence. So that I can come and say I can measure function, cell function, because a function is associated with a change. And this is what we are doing here. So we have the cells, and the cells go into a fluidic line. We are measuring the cell fluorescence before the mixing with some sort of stimuli or something. And then this goes into flow, and then we are detecting again the fluorescence and again the fluorescence, and then we can sort cells depending on the ratio change between this fluorescence here and here. So we're measuring the delta change, the ratio change, and then we sort cells based on that, and obviously this change is associated with introducing the stimuli at this point. How we are doing this? Well, we are relying on two things for doing this. First is laminar flows. You can see that if you have two channels that flow, like this and like this, the liquid from this channel doesn't go into this channel. So in essence, if I put a cell here and I move it from here to here, this cell will we'll have an environment change. We'll have an environment change. The second thing that we are doing, actually we are using dielectrophoresis, and then we are moving the cells between these two flows. So I'm going to show you briefly this movie here, and you see when we activate the electrodes, the cells very nicely start to go into the other channel. So this corresponds to a change in environment, and actually this can also be used for cell sorting. So this is actually what we are, this is the device, this is the sketch of the device that we have done, and basically you have the flow direction. So the cells start here, they go like this, and they travel, they come back to the field of view so that we can image them at different points in time. So we are starting here, then we are imaging the cell when it comes here, here, and here. I have a movie for this, and with this I think I will stop to allow questions, and I will show you this movie and we'll leave it running. I will show you, so the cell is going to go out, it's going to come here, like this, come here and come here. So we can measure these delta changes and then we can store the cells. So I think I will stop here so that we will allow for some questions.
Thank you very much. Very nice presentation and interesting. Open for the questions, please. Michaela, first, yeah. Michaela.
Thank you for the very nice talk. My question relates to the first part of the talk, and I'm interested to know how do you plan to fix the bacteria for the analysis, and what would be the influence of the protein content of both the bacteria and of the ligand researchers to track the bacteria?
Yeah, so we could obviously maybe bioaccumulate the surface and make a link, but I believe this is not necessary. I mean, in a way, I believe that trapping the bacteria to the surface is not necessary, because what we can do, you know, to trap the bacteria, we can move the pipette gently and engulf the bacteria in the fiber cavity. Something like this, so it will be like a scanning microscope that goes and engulfs the bacteria there. Now, I think there are going to be challenges with this. We might be able to have other strategies that we don't go in contact, but we'll see about that. In regard to the protein specificity, I think we'll have to normalize to the amount of protein. Obviously, we can't, if we have protein in the system, that will absorb at about, I think I'm not 260 anyway, 260 to something nanometers, and antibiotics, most of them, I think they are over 300 nanometers, I mean with a few exceptions. So you have to choose an antibiotic that goes into the right wavelength range, unless you want to see something on top of something, which is not so complicated. And especially, we could also use Raman possibly, because this system can be adapted for Raman, and then you're much more specific with what you do. So you have the cavity working. So yeah, I mean, I know it's not fully answering.
But it's also a matter of the concentration. So assumably, one has a lot of protein content in the bacteria, while the antibiotic would have a concentration.
I know, but actually, if you look at this experiment, I think we have a bit of a the antibiotics are generally accumulating in bacteria. They don't. I think this is we don't only have a few molecules in there. So I think we have over 100 molecules, and maybe more, even thousands of antibiotic molecules in the bacteria. I agree. Its specificity is a problem. So yeah. That's why I said maybe Raman, but I think it's a starting point. I think showing that you can do this is important, and yeah, how you're sorting the specificity problem is going to be indeed something to.
Somebody wanted, yes, please.
No, it's about the specificity. It's the same thing of the specificity.
Yes, please.
Question related to the influx pumps.
Yes.
So we are measuring the accumulation through porings.
Yes.
But at the same time,
Pumping out.
particularly Pseudomonas aeruginosa is pumping out the antibiotic. I think that you need to start with genetically engineered bacteria
Yes, of course.
having the efflux pump
Yes.
shut down
Yes.
at the right space.
We actually have some strains already. Laura Pidok, you might know her, she gave us some strains that have this particular thing that the efflux, E. coli they are, that where the efflux pumps are knocked out, they are overexpressed and or underexpressed. So we do have this in mind, and I think we are taking this into consideration.
And I think that this technique would be very promising to study some molecules able to enter mutated points, because this is a very big problem with antibiotic resistance.
Yes.
They suffer mutations, they are changing their conformation, so the
Yes.
can enter to the first time. Yes, congratulations.
Any other question, please?
Just a quick one. You touched on the connection between structure and function by the end of the presentation. So the way I got it was that you measured the function just to figure out the structure. Because the question is, could it be in principle that functions are underdetermined by the structures? So several structures could compute the same function. So you cannot actually infer the structure from the function.
I'm not sure if I'm going to answer my question, but I will give you my mindset when I started to doing this. Cells so far have been cataloged based on morphology. Or actually cells have started to be cataloged based on morphology. After the morphology has been extracted, people observe that there is a function associated with the morphology. So what I wanted to do, in a big scale, is actually I said, why are we not cataloging function instead of morphology in the first place? And then we can look at structure and so on. So this is it is indeed an interplay between those things. I think there is, of course, function must be connection to structure, but I think the methods we had so far lacked that ability to sort cells based on their function. Obviously, people could argue on that, but when I say function, I mean really dynamics inside the cell. And that's what I tried to do.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Thank you very much. And we are coming to our third presentation. This will be detection of all molecular weight compounds using reflected light microscopy. Now this is Professor Gaspar, I can pronounce that, but the first one we have
Sylvester.
Oh, Sylvester. Sylvester. Please.
So, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Indeed, my name is Sylvester Gaspar, and I'm going to show you the way we detect small molecular weight compounds with light microscopy. And I hope that this title intrigues you a little bit, as when it comes to detection of low molecular weight compounds, light microscopy is not an obvious choice. It was several times highlighted during this symposium that cells are different, and that's the problem we try to address with this study. They are indeed different. What wasn't highlighted up to this point is that not only their intracellular space is different, so they build up an extracellular space which is different from one cell to other. Indeed, it's different because the inside of the cells is different. But one can notice differences in the extracellular space, and there are not many analytical tools which are suitable to probe this. So to come here and sense something, to go here, sense something, go to the third cell and sense something. So there's a lack of tools to measure things there. Our group is working on small, tiny electrochemical probes. So we can push in a microelectrode here, measure maybe pH changes in this space, or we can pick up some reactive oxygen species if these cells are suffering of oxidative stress. But those approaches have a couple of limitations, like lack of temporal resolution. So scanning with that probe from one cell to other must be done really slow, otherwise you perturb the extracellular space. So what we thought to do instead of those tiny probes to go into the extracellular space is to look for a sensing layer. So to find a polymer or something which is sensitive to a very specific compound from the extracellular space, the first requirement. And then we thought, okay, if this sensing layer is changing optical properties, that could bring something new into the picture. And then the third thing we were looking for is reversibility. So we wanted to observe not only increases in concentrations, but also decreases. And for that you need reversibility. So if you have something like that, then you can take your optical microscope and make pictures of this interface. And those pictures will carry this chemical information. So this is the problem, is these differences in between the cells, and this is our approach, so how we try to address this. And we had some experience with redox hydrogels. We used these gels for years to build electrochemical sensors, so those tiny probes I was talking about. So we turned to them. Let's see, are they also suitable to carry out an optical sampling of that extracellular space? So redox hydrogels are mixtures, are gels constructed with three components: an enzyme, a redox polymer, and a crosslinker. In our case, this crosslinker was this polyethylene glycol diglycidyl ether. Then, as redox polymer, we used polyvinyl imidazole derivative, which from place to place is decorated with these osmium centers. And then, when it comes to enzymes, the first one we took into work was horseradish peroxidase, and that's because these enzymes, the main substrate of this enzyme is hydrogen peroxide, an important reactive oxygen species. And when you build a gel, a redox hydrogel with these three components, and the enzyme is horseradish peroxidase, in presence of hydrogen peroxide, you start this reaction cascade, and that reaction cascade leads to oxidized osmium compounds. And the problem is that you have sensitivity to hydrogen peroxide, you have a changing property, so this oxidation state is changing, you don't have reversibility. So you need to still couple it to an electrode and pump in electrons. So you make this thing reversible and keep it going. Another possibility which we explored, and I will show some results, is building a redox hydrogel with glucose oxidase. The main difference is that this gel will be this time sensitive to glucose, one of the most important small molecular weight compound in biology. And important to note, this reaction cascade will lead to the reduction of this redox hydrogel. Again, reversibility is only gained if you use an electrode. So keep in mind that we need an electrode so we can turn this osmium 2 to osmium 3. So how to make a simple structure which makes these redox hydrogels compatible with an optical microscope. So we built this stack of materials, so a 3-layer thin glass, which lets you use high magnification objectives, then fluorine-doped tin oxide or indium tin oxide, so FTO or ITO. We need this layer as they are conductive. We need this layer as an electrode, so to provide that reversibility. And finally, you can coat the redox hydrogels I was talking about. So you can put this gel with horseradish peroxidase and get this layer sensitive to hydrogen peroxide, or you can put a redox hydrogel with glucose oxidase and get this structure sensitive to glucose. Important to notice, so in reality, this structure looks like an electrode 500 microns by 500 microns. Is decorated with disc-shaped holes, and we built those in order to have reference areas. So this area will be not active because there is no electrode which can provide that reversibility for the reaction cascade. Before we tried to investigate the optical properties of this stack, this 3-layer stack, we checked out if the biochemical reaction is going on, and we checked out which concentrations we can investigate. So my first picture here is a cyclic voltammogram of a redox hydrogel built with horseradish peroxidase and sensitive through this enzyme to hydrogen peroxide. First, the black voltammogram shows that we can oxidize, we can reduce this redox hydrogel, and when you put in your experiment hydrogen peroxide, indeed the concentration of oxidized osmium species increases. So we have a structure of which oxidation state we can tune and which is sensitive to hydrogen peroxide. If you don't scan the potential but you pulse the potential to this value, 0.2, or to this value, minus 0.50, at this point you oxidize the hydrogel, at this point you reduce it, and just as suggested by this experiment, the oxidation currents are decreasing, but the reduction currents are increasing, and they are increasing with proportionally with the hydrogen peroxide concentration. This is the calibration curve, which indicates that yes, we can detect hydrogen peroxide up to 200 micromolars. The detection limit at this point is around 50 micromolar, which is a little bit high maybe, but things are far from being 100% optimized. We could do that with glucose, so I'm showing these are purely electrochemical results still, with a redox hydrogel, which contains glucose oxidase, that is sensitive to glucose. This time, the voltammograms again, oxidation of the gel, reduction. When you put in glucose, 1 millimolar, this time the reduced state, the osmium centers in reduced states are increasing in concentration. Those are producing an increased oxidation current. The same experiment with those potential pulses, but this time we have a reverse picture. So if here we had reduction currents increasing due to hydrogen peroxide, here we have oxidation currents increasing. The calibration curve looks a little bit more complicated than the one before because it has two linear ranges. Analytical chemists, we don't like this, but we can live with it. The linearity is up to 1.6 millimolar glucose. The detection limit is 450 micromolar, which in terms of glucose is excellent, as we are working with something like around 5 millimolar up to 50 when you have diabetes. So those were the preliminary electrochemical measurements, just showing that yes, this gel is functioning on those transparent electrodes we constructed, and somehow identifying which are the ranges we can detect them. Then we started observing the very same interface. So the interface, I was showing results, electrochemical results. This time we started filming it from below, and this is a frame of those films. You can notice 48 regions of interest we defined, and then we did such experiments, pulsed. So we just pulsed the indium tin oxide or the fluorine doped tin oxide electrode to these potentials and see what's going on. And then when you analyze the evolution of the intensity of your pictures, so of this region of interest, 28 for example, what we notice that indeed these polymers are also optically active. So when you oxidize them at plus 200, the intensity, mean intensity is increasing. When you reduce them, is decreasing. And then you can, by setting this potential, you can set the limits. So I know that when my hydrogel is fully oxidized, my picture is this, of this intensity. When it's fully reduced, is of this intensity. And then you put in your experiment hydrogen peroxide. When there's no hydrogen peroxide, the intensity of your image of this region of interest, analyzed as an average, will not change. But in the presence of hydrogen peroxide, that reaction cascade I was showing 2-3 slides ago starts going on and affects this redox hydrogen layer which you are filming, and the intensity goes up, sign that you oxidize through hydrogen peroxide that hydrogen layer. And the change of intensity is faster when hydrogen peroxide is present in more concentration. So just as you did with the electrochemical measurements, this time you can build a calibration curve from purely optical information. So the intensity of this tiny region of interest, 18 micron by 18 micron, approximately 1.5 cell. We compared two transparent electrode materials, the indium tin oxide and FTO, the fluorine doped tin oxide. Indium tin oxide seems to be a little bit more sensitive. The same was happening with the gel, which was made with glucose oxidase. So this time, this interface again, about the same electrodes, but slightly different shaped reference areas. You start filming this type of materials. You analyze region of interest 43, again 18 micron by 18 micron, and you see that that region is doing like this. The average sensitivity again is decreased when it's reduced, increasing when it's oxidized, decreasing. This time, you can leave the hydrogel in oxidized state, and if there is no glucose, nothing will happen to it. However, when glucose is present above this region of interest, the intensity of that region of interest goes down. And again, if you analyze these slopes, you can build a calibration curve, and range of glucose concentration which you can detect this way, this time optically, is about the same as in electrochemical measurements. Again, one, namely ITO, is more sensitive. Somehow it provides a bigger signal change than FTO. So another issue, and my last issue, is the selectivity. We built the redox hydrogel with horsedich peroxidase, so it should be sensitive to hydrogen peroxide, and that's what we observed. So when we challenged this interface with glucose, 1.6 millimolar, we observed quite tiny signal, coefficient of selectivity, excellent. Things are not so nice when we did the other way around. So we took a glucose oxidase containing hydrogel, challenged it with hydrogen peroxide. There is some interference. However, the concentration was rather high, so usually oxidative stress is not causing such a high accumulation of hydrogen peroxide in the extracellular space, 0.9. So my conclusions, I tried to show you that reflected light microscopy combined with transparent electrodes, these FTO, ITO electrodes, and with this enzyme-based redox hydrogel can be used to detect low molecular weights compounds with high spatial resolution. These are the analytical performances. I already mentioned the 18 by 18 microns region of interest. The hydrogen peroxide detection is working in slightly smaller regions. What I didn't mention at all, the coefficient of variation. So if you have this interface, you divide it in small regions of interest, and if you analyze how is this region of interest reporting about glucose, and this one, and that one, and that one, you go slightly above 10% coefficient of variation. Very important, when this is something we expected but we didn't know if it will happen or not, the oxidized reduced form of this redox hydrogel, they do have different optical properties, and this fact allows our procedure. There are plenty of other redox hydrogels, so you can build these gels with different enzymes, for example glutamate oxidase, if you are interested in neurons accumulating glutamate in their extracellular space. We started experiments in actual cells. These are the images from our very first experiments. These are yeast cells. So what we are interested in, how this yeast cell is consuming glucose as compared to this one, and as compared to a region of interest where there is no cell. These experiments are still noisy. We are working on analyzing them and improving them. I cannot finish without this slide. So plenty of my colleagues from here, from the institute, helped me. Sorin Malita, sitting over there, made the electrodes, these transparent indium oxide electrodes. Wolfgang Schumann and Jan Rapp, they were providing the redox polymers. These are made, you cannot buy them, they must be synthesized. Rabah, who was involved with Sorin Malita in building those things, and funding from this so-called UFHJ is also great knowledge. Thank you very much for your attention.
We are very much on time. That's very nice, even ahead of the time, according to the latest start. Please, if you have a question. Yes.
How do you think that machine learning can help you move forward with this?
Can you just repeat a little bit louder, because also
how Sylvester thinks that machine learning can help us moving on with this business, with this noisy data in the end he was mentioning?
I think so. This procedure, this way of detecting local concentrations of glucose or hydrogen peroxide is very much based on image analysis. So our raw images, they look exactly like this. The changes of intensity are extremely tiny. So if you can work on this, going through 48 regions of interest and thousands of slides, because this is one frame of that movie. So this is a huge amount of data. Here, anything which can automate, which can analyze these pictures, which can make the calculations and tell me that yes, the glucose over there was much higher than here, is something which probably can be held by machine learning.
So you are working on creating this type of databases? Because after you create the raw data, there is this cleaning and preparation, and then putting the algorithms to work with, but do you think
So
it's time
I'm
to-
taking it step by step. I want to take it to the cellular level and to see that yes,
Exactly, cellular level.
this is really functioning. I can detect how much glucose this cell sitting over here is consuming as compared to cell number 36. If these are working, then what you are saying is obviously can be the next step.
Please, so related exactly to what you said, how do you imagine this is going to work with the cells on top of the detectors? They're going to ooze the glucose from the bottom basic membrane towards the detector, or?
For example, yeast cells, they consume the glucose. They make fermentation.
Yeah.
And you expect that if there is an active cell, wherever, I don't know, here, which number, I don't know. So that if you analyze that region, that you will notice a lower concentration than your barcode concentration.
And your detection speed will be such that it will be quicker than the diffusion rate of the, and equilibrium reached
No,
in the back.
these things, they are building up steady state gradients. So if this cell is active, is not active for a fraction of time, it creates a diffusion there, a gradient in the extracellular space. And this is what we try to analyze. But indeed, it is tricky, it is something to see.
If I'm in a bath and I have millimolar glucose in the bath and I have a cell over here consuming glucose,
Yeah.
I'm not sure how much around that cell will be a difference in concentrations locally.
For
But
example,
if you have it attached to the sensor,
these are lying on the.
yeah, if they are attached, then
Yeah.
you might create a space
Yeah.
which is protected, and
Yeah.
in that particular region you might get a differential.
Actually, that is what we address first of all, because we film from below exactly that interface.
Right.
So what is above, it might escape to our.
Please.
So I also have a question more or less like on the same lines as Studio. What is the resolution in terms of spatial? I mean, how much can you detect in the vicinity of the cell? I think what contrast, what.
So right now, these are 80 microns by 80 microns.
Exactly. So that they are very big compared to a cell. So
depending on what cell you are considering.
okay.
They are big compared to this one. These are 3 microns, 4 microns maybe. Also, these are very initial results. So we already published the paper. We actually had no time and resources to go very far from here. Almost nothing is optimized. So including the layer which we deposit by broadcasting. So there are other procedures to make this layer more uniform, for example. All these issues. Lighting sensitivity, not optimized. Thickness of the electron material, not optimized. So we hope that these 12 micron by 12 micron, 18 by 18, they are initial values. And
for example, I mean, my question is more, if you have a single cell, let's say I would have done it differently there, I would have just put a single cell. Can you, if you have a single cell in the whole space, can you detect what's in its environment?
Yeah, we hope so. Yeah.
So maybe if you just put the previous slide, because I would, for me also was not always clear, just to show how your sensor is built up and from where light comes and what you measure, comparing with the size direct.
So our cell is here.
So the size of the cell
The
would
size,
be
so this is 15 microns.
that would be the size of the cell, okay? So and the light is coming now.
We are sending plenty of light from the bottom, and this is mainly transparent, and a small fraction of that light is coming back, affected by these interfaces, and that's what we analyze. And that light coming back carries this chemical information because my gel suffers because of this casting.
But what I understand, the point is what is the depth of this? Because if you have a lot, the depth of your chamber, and also how much hydrogel is, so that what you are capturing in the neighborhood will be addressed. If I understood, I think for me that was also not clear. So that's
that's why I mentioned the thickness, for example.
Yes,
These issues are really important, and yes, you have to think about it. Okay, how thick is this gel? But at this point, this is a manually deposited and dried gel. Its thickness actually is unknown for me. I would say it's micron thick, and those changes in oxidation state, you can pick them up and you can measure stuff, what is above. So I think we can do it. And we have experience, I was mentioning, with tiny probes, and for example, the pH gradient is extending something like 500 micrometers above a cell. We know this, we measure it. So that's why I'm optimistic that what these cells are developing in the extracellular space is something we can do.
because it's very active, right? All the time it's sort of using the. Is that?
Yeah, I mean, you may have some of the data already because you have the image from every sensor. So you could look locally one sensor that you're targeting and then look around and see how the other ones are reacting.
So
you
all
can
these-
compare the
All
curves.
these are not sensors, so these are regions of interest you can put.
No, but you had that array of sensors.
No, those are not the
Those.
these regions of interest. They don't exist.
Okay. There's just,
So I can
got it.
reconfigure this and analyze my
Yeah.
my images
I see.
in whatever way I want. So
Okay.
there's no physical thing.
Okay.
I mean, one quick idea to get three-dimensional stuff is maybe to change the heights of these patches, and then you could possibly get a gradient. I'm not sure.
At this point,
I
we
know
analyze
this
the
is-
reflected light. So when you have something 3D, which tends to absorb, maybe to diffract, you might run into this problem. But other optical procedures might be suitable.
Anybody else? If not, thank you very much for interesting. Now we are coming to our fourth presentation. Zeiss latest technology for long-term volumetric imaging of living cells. Tudor Cicciarone.
Sorry, my voice is a bit down today, it seems. Very happy to be here. It was an interesting week, I would say. And I have a presentation I will go through it quite quickly, not to take too much of your time. You're going to see a lot of nice images, which I hope you're going to like. And I always start my presentation by, let's say, reminding you the portfolio that Zeiss has in terms of microscopy. Because maybe some of you know that we have only photonic microscopy, light microscopy. But we also have X-ray machines, we have electron microscopes, and we even have what we call the beasts, the focused ion beam and the helium ion. Sure. Is a problem?
No, it's okay.
Okay, but from this portfolio, I'm going to speak about the light microscopy, and more specifically about our light sheet microscopy portfolio. And we have two systems. One of the systems is actually here in the other room, the lattice light sheet. But we have also the light sheet 7, the classical Gaussian light sheet microscope, and this is the light sheet 7. And then maybe, I don't know if you're familiar with the light sheet microscopy. Can you please raise your hand? Very nice, great. Maybe you'll, thank you, let's make it a bit more interactive, right? And you see, if you look at the two systems, they are quite complementary, but I would say that the light sheet 7 is covering a broader area of applications, from really large specimens until the spheroids. It doesn't really go to the living cells, the monolayers, but in that range, actually the lattice light sheet is the one doing the very nice job. And then maybe your next question will be, okay, what can I do with the light sheet microscopy, and why would I choose a light sheet microscope to a confocal microscope, for example, or a classical epifluorescence microscope. This is the light sheet 7. So, imagine that you have a specimen. In this case, you have a zebrafish which is alive, but it can be anything else that it's alive. And you want to observe the fluorescence or the signal coming from this focal plate. With the classical microscope, the problem is that you put quite a lot of stress on this little monkey. Simply because you put a lot of your scan pixel by pixel through the whole specimen. While with the light sheet microscope, you just observe this. You send a sheet of light basically through the specimen. And then you move the specimen very quick through this light sheet. What would be the advantage? First of all, less photobleaching, much less photobleaching. And the other one, it's imaging very, very, very fast. So altogether, only advantages. Good. For the light sheet 7, actually, another thing that we do, it doesn't look like the classical vertical microscope that you are maybe very familiar with. In here, we call it a horizontal microscope, and we decouple the excitation. You see in here 2 excitation objectives, and this is the emission objective. So if you look into this chamber, it will look like that. You see, you illuminate from the left, from the side. This is the specimen, and this is the detection objective that collects the light coming from your specimen. And you have another very, very big advantage. If you look here on the right-hand side, you see we can freely rotate the specimen and position it for the position we want to image. So that's a big advantage again. Why do we have 2 illumination objectives? Well, we speak here about really fixed specimen. So you can imagine if you have just one coming from the left, you see you get nice images here on the left, but the deeper you go, the less signal you have. While if you do it from the right-hand side as well, and then fuse it, you end up with a very, very nice image like you see it in here. This is what we call dual-side illumination. But more than this, you have some other options. You can also rotate it. Remember, you can freely position it. So you do a Z-stack here, you rotate, you take one from here, one from here. This is what we call multi-view imaging. And then also via the software, we can register the images and we can fuse it. And end up with such a very nice image. Real 3D imaging of your specimen. For the light sheet 7, we have really a broad range of objectives for excitation and for illumination. Depending on the application, if you have it in water, living specimen, or you will see later on for clearing specimen nowadays. Also dedicated chamber, so this is the chamber that we put inside of the microscope and we put the sample inside. As you see in here, you have different numbers here for refractive indexes, for water or for clearing reagents. And what I want to point out, because Professor Melinte also mentioned about the machine learning, nowadays Zeiss is doing, I would say, a smart thing. It doesn't sell only the machine with acquisition, but we also have software packages with machine learning, with deep learning, so we have the whole workflow, even correlative microscopy. You see now a full grain image with our light sheet via our software called Arivis, which is very powerful in 3D rendering and also volumetric analysis. Good. You see here a very nice slide showing you what you can do actually with the light sheet 7, with the Gaussian light sheet. Coming from really big specimen, you see here an embryo from a mouse I think. In here you see a zebrafish, and this is interesting. This is calcium imaging with a GCAM sensor. And also we cover things like you see here, the Drosophila melanogaster and spheroids, which is really exploding nowadays for research. Good. Yes?
A quick mention. Make sure that's not a zebrafish, that's a zebrafish larva.
Thank you for saying that.
Big difference.
Very big difference. Huge difference. Thank you for saying that. Okay, coming back to the main idea. I was telling you that we launched actually the light sheet Z1. It was at that moment back in 2013, Radu helped me here. And initially it was of course for living specimen to see how they develop. You see here an example. So really long-term imaging. But then, also for fast processing, you see here the heartbeat of a zebrafish. 2 colors simultaneously because you can put 2 cameras. 80 frames per second acquisition rate. Plants. My favorite example is from Czech Republic. So you see here the Arabidopsis flower, but also not only flowers, leaves, and you see the next example, it's plants. It's plant root. I let you enjoy for a second, and then I move forward. But then, and I remember I was a postdoc in Leuven in 2013 actually, because there was a big explosion, there was really a pioneering thing about clearing large specimens. And I remember my professor was telling me, look, why don't you try? We have this brain from the mouse. It's very hard to image it because it's very, very opaque, of course. And at that moment there was the reagent called scale. And I placed that brain into a tube and I left it in the fridge for 1 month. And after 1 month I could see a little bit of transparency, but not much. But nowadays things are crazy with this, and you can clearly see in here, for example, you see this brain, and then after clarity clearing, you see it completely transparent. And there are many reagents that you can use, water-based or organic solvents-based. Initially in 2014 or 15, I think it was, we adapted our light sheet to the water-based. For example, clarity over here. But then, it was already 2 years ago, we broadened the range for the organic solvents, so higher refractive indexes. So you will ask me, okay, so what can you do with this? Well, if the specimen is transparent like that, you can image deeper, so you get better information from the deep. Have a look at this, please. Different kind of applications with different kind of solvents. Water-based, till really like iodisco or ethylcinamate here with high refractive indexes, 1.57. Some nice images I let you enjoy. This is a lymph node. This is a mouse brain hemisphere. And this I want to show that, of course, we have different detection objectives. And even the quality of the 5-time objective is just amazing. But then, of course, if you want to have subcellular resolution, you go to the 20 times, like you see it in here. And you get really great details. And finally, you will see this very nice organoid. Especially for organoids, we're selling the light sheet more and more. For live ones, but especially for cleared ones, like you see in here. And the details you have is just amazing. And then you can just segment the image, do machine learning, for example, and get the numbers out of the measurements. So it's a huge progress. Good. So this is the part of the light sheet 7. Take-home message, really broad range of applications, is very fast. Just to tell you a rough comparison, what you can image with the confocal in a couple of hours, with the light sheet, you do it in 1 minute maybe. Very low photo bleaching, free sample positioning, and you get with the 20 times, we have even a 40 times, subcellular resolution. Now we move to the Bravo lattice light sheet that we have also in the other room. What can you do with it? You can do things like that. It's very gentle, it gives you better resolution than the classical light sheet. You're going to see in the next slide why is this happening. And you can image cells like this. This is a nuclear envelope marker for lamin B. And we're speaking here about really measuring volumes like with crazy speed over time. And being very gentle, so basically you don't see almost no photo bleaching. Cells are happy, they are dividing, they're growing, so this is very nice. Why is that? You're going to see in the next slide. If you would compare it to the classical Gaussian light sheet that I just presented, it's a bit thicker, you see it in here. So of course you have certain resolution, but then Professor Eric Betzik from United States said, okay, I want to try something different. And he used the so-called Bessel beams, which are thinner. So he said, I want to use the Bessel beam to create maybe a light sheet technology. But there was a problem with the scan Bessel beam. If you look in here, it's indeed thinner than that, but it had some side lobes of excitation. So you can't really use it. But then he discovered that if you would bring those, let's say, more Bessel beams together, there was a process of destructive interference, and then you can create this beautiful lattice pattern that you see in here without side lobes and really thin. And this is what we use actually. We got the pattern from him, and initially we have it for super resolution for our ELINAR 7 project, combined with structured illumination microscopy. But now we have it also for this kind of images together with the light sheet. And you see here one example, continuous volumetric imaging for 9 hours, more than 1 million images. And the dynamics information from here is just crazy. Good. There is something else different. Compared to the other system, we don't have that many objectives. We have only 2. One for illumination at 10 times here, and one for emission. But this is a really special one. Why do I say that? It doesn't touch directly the sample. Actually, what we have here, we have a meniscus, and I forgot to tell you this is a water immersion objective. So actually the water comes inside of this meniscus, it's a lens actually, that makes the correction between water-air interface. And you would ask now, so why is this important? Well, it is important because if the objective doesn't really touch the sample directly, you have a great stability. So no need for focus strategies to keep the sample in focus over days. Another thing, you see this is again, the lattice light sheet. We have auto immersion, so you don't have to put water whenever you, let's say you see that the water is gone. You can program it by software. And finally, this beautiful stage, which is unique, and it's actually a 5-axis stage. You can do lateral positioning, axial, you can do multi-well plate, so you can do fast scanning over centimeter distances, and you can also correct for the tilt of the sample, of the dish, which is really, really great. Let me show you again some images. You see here a T cell. For cancer research, maybe this is very, very interesting. And not only. Another one, you see here a cell, and actually together with Arabius, we can do now tracking. So you get a very nice information about the trajectory of the molecules inside of your cells. I heard some application this week about some nanoparticles that you can put inside the cell, and maybe you want to track it because they have fluorescence as well, I'm sure of that. You can also do a bit larger specimens, but not very thick. I would say 50 microns, maybe with a bit of pushing 100 microns, that would be the limit in thickness. But you see, you can do things like that, like at this oocyte. Or like this, a C. elegans. And on this, you have to be really, really gentle. So this is the proof that this machine is the right thing for it. And finally, I think I have a last movie about mRNA through the life cycle. And you see again, combined with the trajectory, calculation and estimation from Arabius, gives a lot of nice information. And the examples can be many, 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 many. This is the last thing, volumetric imaging, very gentle, very stable, good resolution. What are you waiting? Thank you so much, we make it visible.
Thank you very much.
I hope I was in time.
We use once, very good. Everybody is in time, even a more shorter place.
No, I have no question.
I thought you wanted.
It's crystal clear. Thank you.
Anybody else? Questions or so?
What's the thickness of the light sheets in the 2 cases?
We can generate a number of 5 or 6 different light sheets, even the lattice light sheet that you're speaking now, the lattice light sheet, from 15 microns to 100. 15, 30,
The Gaussian is how much is the Gaussian?
The Gaussian can go also from 40 to 150 to 100 sometimes, different frequencies as well. And in there we have 2 types of excitation objective, a 5 times and a 10 times to match it to the emission objectives as well.
And the other one, so that's from 40, the Gaussian, and the lattice one?
The lattice one from 15 can have 15.
Anybody else? Comments or questions?
You want to ask something?
Okay.
It's really impressive. My question is once again about the modification of the objective and somehow compatibility with increasing further the Zs and packaging. So I wonder, it's a matter of crisis as well, but if you want to have an instrument that can also bridge nicely the
inner samples, you mean, right? Well, I'll be honest with you, I don't see the latching technology at the interface, but you can use a classical microscope, and we have beautiful confocal. We have the Lyra with the lattice seam. If you see it, you'll be crying. It's so nice. And I think that's the right system, actually. And maybe we can arrange a demo here in Romania for you to see it. And I think this is the system we're talking about.
What was the name once more?
Lyra structured illumination microscopy, but we have now the lattice illumination that we have in the light sheet. And we can reach resolutions down to 60 nanometers. We can push it. And fast, 255 frames per second 2D imaging. This is the system I would think of.
Anybody else? Comments or anything? Questions? If not,
thank you.
Thank you very much. And now we are coming to our next presentation. That will be towards the assessment of Botrytis cinerea spores by coupled electrochemical and Raman spectroscopic assays with Alina. Please.
Thank you very much. This work is actually a collaboration between research groups from our institute, from Professor Aștilan Țulup in Cluj-Napoca, from the Wine Institute in Valea Călugărească, and the Institute of Biology from Bucharest. Actually, yesterday in the poster presentation, you saw a poster about the detection of lacase activity in grapes, and it was discussed the motivation for the detection of lacase activity and for wanting to see if the grapes are infected by Botrytis cinerea. It is because there are great economical loss to the industry once the vineyards are affected by this fungal pathogen infection. So we started to, in the frame of a project, we wanted to build a sensor, actually including two sensors, one for lacase activity and one for directly detecting the spores of Botrytis cinerea. And why we wanted to have this dual approach is because there are some methods, of course, for the detection of Botrytis cinerea, but none is perfect. There are methods that take a long time and are not appropriate for use in the vineyard, such as those based on DNA or antibody kits commercially available. And there are also other methods which are fast and could be used with some adaptations for detection in the vineyard, but these are not specific, like the detection of some metabolites like lacase, like we did, or glycerol or gluconic acid and so on. There are also other possibilities, and there is actually a topic of detection the infection of Botrytis cinerea in the vineyard by using hyperspectral imaging or gigahertz ultrasonic imaging, or try to acquire the fingerprint of Raman spectrum of the fungal spores, because there are portable Raman equipment developed continuously. So actually we wanted to have a method able to detect these spores directly in the vineyard, so in a fast way. We managed to, like it was presented yesterday, we managed to develop the method for lacase activity to be very fast, like 5 minutes detection, and to be able to use it in the vineyard, and we published that. So we had the input from the people in the vineyard applying this method, and we know for sure they want something that is very, very fast and extremely simple. So we don't want to make something that it's easy for us, but for them it's actually pretty complicated. So we started with trying to know a little bit about the spores of Botrytis cinerea. The spores were provided by the Wine Institute from Valea Călugărească, and we tried to first observe them on the surface and see their approximate size. So they are about 1 micron in size. Then we were thinking about the methods to do, because we started the project with the idea in mind that we will use antibodies, but antibodies for botrytis cinerea actually are raised against an antigen which is present in the mycelium, so it will not recognize the spores. And another thing is that these antibodies that are available commercially are not specific for botrytis cinerea, but recognize other botrytis types. So this is why, motivated by this lack of biorecognition elements available commercially, we decided why not try a MIP, a molecularly imprinted polymer, also called, they are also called artificial antibodies. And in principle, it should be quite simple. So what is happening, you take a monomer, functional monomer, you mix it with the analyte of interest, in this case the spores, and then once it polymerizes, it makes a polymer film around the analyte. Then you wash away the analyte and you remain with a cavity that is complementary in size, shape and functional groups with the analyte you want to detect. And this is all good, but and MIPs have been very successful, also for sensing, but mostly for purification purposes. And MIPs are very successful, particularly for small analytes. Once you try to detect bigger analytes, because this cavity will be so big and many different functional groups will be required actually to have specificity for your analyte. So we know this is a problem, but already in the literature there are MIPs that were developed for large analytes, like fungal spores or like bacteria. So it's not impossible. Because these spore suspensions are not stable on time in the solution, and we want to have something like more standardized and always be able to prepare solutions of known concentration. We selected bacteria, Micrococcus lysodeicticus, which is commercially available, lyophilized, and we typically use it in the assay of lysozyme enzymatic activity as a substrate. So this bacteria is 1 micron in size and is spherical. So we started to try different types of polymers, and because they are very easy to use to obtain by cyclic voltammetry, for us is another advantage to try to use electrochemistry to prepare the MIPs, because we can obtain it as a film directly on top of the electrodes that we want to use in the vineyard. So we want to use screen printed electrodes, which are currently the lowest cost that we can have, and they are commercially available in various configurations, and we are it's easy to make polymer films on top of them by cyclic voltammetry. So for most of these polymers, the procedure was that we polymerized in the presence of the spores, and we just checked by cyclic voltammetry using a redox probe like ferricyanide that after this is the voltammogram in black for a clean gold electron, and after the electropolymerization of a dopamine film, you can see the transfer of electron is very much reduced, which is the sign that indeed the film was deposited there. And then once we wash away the analyte, so we're going from the black curve to the red one here, supposedly we are just washing away the analyte, and then once we are again putting the spores suspension in contact with this MIPS sensor, we see a decrease in the oxidation and reduction peaks for this redox species, ferricyanide, which indicates that this material is absorbed. Now, the big problem is that we don't know if it's absorbed in these holes or it's absorbed on the surface, it's broken here or absorbed here, so there is no way to know this only from the cyclic voltammetry experiments. And the second problem is that you don't know how much you should go with the washing, where to stop, and how to be sure that you have washed away everything and you do not destroy your polymer. So we did lots of preliminary experiments with many polymers, and we decided that the best one was polytoluidine blue, because well, it also has another advantage that this substance is electrochemically active. It has a reversible pair of anodic and cathodic peaks. It is used as mediator for the oxidation of NADH, so it's very well known and easy to polymerize. So we went further with this polymer, and of course in all these studies we had a non-depleted polymer that was used as control. As I said, it's no way to know just from the cyclic voltammograms if indeed the washing was correct, if indeed we eliminated all the analyte, if the binding takes place in the holes and not elsewhere. So we need imaging for that. Luckily with this bacteria, it's very easy to do this and image them by AFM. So this is the image of a film immediately after the electropolymerization in the presence of spores, and we can see the spores present in a large number on top of the polymer film. Then we washed away these spores, and we can see that, well, we probably managed to damage also some part of this polymer film, but we can see the holes where once were this bacteria. This is the detail here. And this is the rebinding experiment when we were very happy, so we just put incubated with this bacteria, and we were hoping to see them sitting very nicely in the holes. It didn't happen. So actually this is a big problem, and in many of the literature reports involving this, there are basically no proofs that indeed the binding takes place in the holes and not elsewhere. So non-specific binding is a huge problem, and also you need the washing that will not affect the integrity of this film. Going now to the Botrytis cinerea spores, we performed different experiments because we saw from the previous experiments and the FM images with the bacteria that probably the host didn't have the right depth, and this needs to be particularized for the analyte. So we were thinking better to start to put through a polymer film and then then absorb the bacteria and the spores and put the polymer film around them. So in order to have a very good contact and be surrounded by the polymer. So this is why we compared adding the spores from the beginning or after 10 cycles of cyclic voltammetry or after 30 cycles. The total number of cycles was 75 in all cases. We can see differences in morphology depending on how we proceed. And then we also wanted to see how the washing affects our film. So this is the film obtained without any spores. We can see that if we wash this film 2 times, this feature disappears mostly. And also if we wash this one 2 times, we can see that we still have apparently some spores there. So definitely we need to optimize this washing procedure in order not to affect the binding ability of the spores. So, like I said, specificity is the big issue, and besides the washing, so how can we go further? Of course, we didn't optimize anything, so we can use other polymers, or we can think of another way of doing the imprinting. There are many possible ways, but one of the ways we chose was inspired by a literature report. Actually, this was on lysozyme, so it was a small protein, so much smaller than these spores, but they made a MIP, and they used this MIP to observe larger signals for lysozyme. So we were thinking to do the same. So we have our MIP, we put the spores, and once the spores are in these holes, we are supposed to see a high increase in the signal. This was what we wanted to do. So for that, luckily, last year, in the last part of this year, we acquired this equipment, which is can be portable Raman equipment, which performs integrated electrochemical and Raman measurements. So you can opt either for separate, you can do separately electrochemical and Raman characterization, or at the same time both. So this is the Raman cell, and this is the probe. With this setup, you also have different types of screen printed electrodes that you can use as substrates to observe your probes. You can also analyze powdered samples, solid samples, or you can analyze liquids. So this equipment has a 785 nanometer laser and is produced by from DropSense Spain. The first step, because it was a new equipment, was of course to see if we observe some reference spectra and we can replicate them with this new equipment. So we just did some spectra of nanomaterials like carbon black, and we compared with those from the application notes of the manufacturer. And also what here I really want to emphasize the big help from the Professor Ashlan's group in Cluj, who helped me and trained me and always supported me to learn about this technique and to perform these experiments. So actually they also provided me with their data on the spectra of a typical marker, mercaptobenzoic acid, which was observed on glass slides with the help of the presence of some colloids that Professor Ashland presented in the last days. So we wanted to see if we can replicate this, and we checked this with different types of screen-printed electrodes, and we checked different experimental conditions like the integration time for this. So basically we were happy that we were able to replicate these results, which are for reference compounds, but it's important for us to see. Now it's not so nice what I'm showing here, but these are the spectra. These are kind of the spectra for the adsorbed spores. So just absorbing them on various surfaces that we tried. So we tried gold electrodes, two types of gold electrodes, silver one, carbon one, or aluminum foil, or even ceramic. We absorbed the spore solution and let it dry on these substrates, and then we acquired the spectra. So either we didn't get any kind of signal, or if it was something, it was like this, and it was with a high background. So it would be very error prone to try to make sense of this and get a background correction here. Among these type of electrodes available from Metron DropSense, there is one type of gold electrodes which has its own spectral signature in the Raman. So this can be used as a marker to see if we can have any modification upon absorption of the spores. We observed the Aspergillus carbonarius and the Botrytis cinerea, and we see some very, very small differences in this case. So the first impression is that with this approach, we only have like a high background, and we can see very, very small differences between two types of fungal pathogens. So then it's better to try cells. These results are from Professor Ashlan's group. They were obtained by my colleague Monica Botara, and basically they absorb first a colloid, silver coated with pitosan on glass slides. Then after drying, they put the spore suspension, and they image, they take the Raman spectrum on different locations in that spot. They used laser with 632 nanometers. So once acquiring the spectra from different spots, they did the average spectrum, and this allowed to compare the different strains. The 3 strains were compared. So, and here's also the interpretation of the bands that we observe here. So basically, we can see that there are differences between the 3 strains, and these differences will need to be explored further with different concentrations of these spore solutions, and we added other fungal pathogens. We have like a library, and also in order to make sense of this data, we will need to use a chemometric method to have something reliable for the interpretation. So going now to our attempts to replicate somehow what was obtained in Cluj. So this is the spectra of a solution of motility spores, and after we mix the solution with gold nanospheres from Cluj, and we drive it on the silver electrode, so an electrode that doesn't have a background, doesn't have a signature in Raman. We observe an enhanced signal here, like similarly with what Monica observed in Cluj. So we were able to try to see, well, here we just acquired three spectra just to see if this laser power is too big and the sample gets damaged or not, but it seems stable. And then we tried the different colorides that we had from Cluj. This is the background, so just as see the so this is this is with Porsche, and this is with silver chitosan, and the best results were obtained with gold nanoparticles. So gold nanoparticles were used further for this experiment. We tried to see different dilutions of these four solutions, so indeed we see a variation, so we can just take, even if we take only this peak, in theory we can have some correlation. This is the blank, so we have here only gold nanospheres, no spores at all. So indeed we can see this peak is enhanced is due to something present in the spores. Again, we don't see, we don't have enough information to see if this method is specific or not. We have to do a lot of optimization, testing solutions of different concentration, testing different types of spores in order to see that if this is enough or we have to work further on this. One problem is the stability of the spores suspension. So this is the gold nanosphere solution in water mixed with fresh spores and with spores that have that are 2 weeks old. So you can see with the naked eye there is a big difference. So we need to know the stability of these suspensions, or just have them fresh every day to conclude something. So going to the last line of experiments, basically we said that we want to couple the meat with the detection by Raman. So we tried to see here if we do that. So we perform polymerization of tolerated by cyclic voltammetry, and we can see this is in the presence of spores, and we can see that we can follow by Raman the modification that takes place during the polymerization. Also, we did this polymerization in the presence of spores and in the absence of the spores, and there are some small differences here, not very much, but it's a good start. So we can, in principle, use this approach to follow the progress of polymerization, and we can see some small differences between solution with or without spores. This is a starting point, but of course, it is only preliminary, so much remains to be done. In conclusion, the specificity of the MIP needs to be improved definitely. We need a good procedure, a validated procedure for washing the MIP. We can use other methods instead of cyclic voltammetry to see how much and to quantitate how much of spores are bound or not to this. Of course, we always need imaging to check our results. And seems like a good approach to try to couple electrochemical detection with Raman analysis to improve the specificity of the detection. We have the luck to have these nanoparticles from Cluj, and which gave us the idea that we can use CERS, and if we have well-controlled conditions, we can have improved performance. And once we will have all this figured out, and we'll have a large enough database of analyzing different types of fungal spores at different concentrations, then we can apply the chemometrics and go further. So the next step will be to take real advantage of this integration equipment, because you can use this equipment to follow in real time. So once you are doing the polymerization, you can follow the modification in the Raman spectrum. But also you can do this, you can use electrochemistry to roughen the surface, for example, of the silver electrodes, and to improve their performance, which is best described also in their application out of the manufacturer. So this, we really didn't try this so far. this, I would like to thank you very much for your attention and thank the projects which allowed me to do this research. Thank you.
Maybe one or two short questions, comments. Okay.
You try to see if the lactase is present in the multivariate spots.
Yes, actually we did this, we developed the lactase sensor and we performed some artificial inoculation studies with different strains of botrytis, and we checked the activity of these different strains. So we found differences between them. And also it's known from the literature that not all Botrytis cinerea spores, Botrytis cinerea strains produce lactase, and of course also the lactase activity will be different. So this is why lactase is not specific and is not very good for checking infection with Botrytis, but it's very easy.
Thank you very much. And we are coming to our last presentation today, which is entitled Advanced Cell Culture Approaches for Disease Modeling, Post-Pathogen Character Research and Drug Toxicity and Efficacy Study by Igor Congrats.
Yes, congrats. Thank you.
Please.
Let's just open the presentation. I'm very pleased to be here today, to spend the last 3 days actually with you and also with my colleagues from Laika and Zeiss. It's also a pleasure for me to give the last talk because somehow I like to always finish things with look to the future. So where we want to go and what we want to do in the future. And I also really like the buzzwords of this symposium, biodynamics, the cells, the materials, so all these new approaches that you are applying to do what? Now, it's a question, what do we want to do? Why do we do science? Why do we do life science? And this is a question to you. I don't know if somebody wants to answer. I hope your answer is not to get a Nature publication and more funding, right? So we are doing biology in order to really understand how biology works. And then in the end, why we want to understand biology? In order to make the world a better place for all of us, to live longer and to live healthy, right? So when we are thinking, what is the ultimate goal maybe of biology? It is in the end to understand things that would make us understand diseases better, to understand better how to respond to the different pathogens, and also to make better drugs. Of course, we as a scientist, we don't want to make better drugs, but pharma definitely does, right? So I want to talk about two aspects, how we see the future of the cell culture and in general, let's say the research of the cells that will be more reliable, that will give more results. Because if you look at the trends, pharma is spending a lot of money to make new drugs for us, right? But on the other side, they're also losing a lot of money. Because when you look at the pure numbers, in order to make new therapeuticals, a lot of them fail in the clinical development. It means pharma is working with 1,000 targets, but then in the end, more than half of them fail. And why they fail? Because they are not efficient and they're also not safe. Because at some point, even though they found a good target theoretically, they tested it on the cells. Once they go to the patient, it's actually not safe and it's not efficient. So this is giving us a conclusion that there is a need for in vitro models that would somehow better imitate in vivo. Because in the end, we don't care how something works on one cell. We want to know what will happen in the tissue in the patient. So I will have just two topics today. One of them will be advanced cell culture models, and here I will stick to the organoids, the 3D culture models that model in vivo cellular responses. And the second one will be instrumentation that is mimicking in vivo conditions. So we want both the cells to act like they would be in vivo, but also we want the environment where they are growing to be more like in vivo environment. So not to lose time, let's go to the advanced 3D cell culture models.
And then again, I always have to give some rationale. Why would we use 3D models? Because 2D cultures and 3D cultures are very, very different. Also, you can see the cells. When you grow them in the 2D, they are flat. They don't have their real morphology that they would have in the tissue. So basically, they are just trapped on the bottom of their plastic and not in a real interaction with the others. On the contrary, when you look at the 3D models, then you can see really nice structures being built, because when you put the cells together, give them some kind of an environment, they will do what they do best. They will cooperate one with another. And also, their behavior will be completely different here and here. And what is important for us as well, their response to the drug, survival, will be also completely different. So it's small image, so this is 2D, 3D, 2D, 3D. So we are looking at the different drugs. In this case, we have had 2 drugs. It's a breast cancer model. And you can see that there are very, very different responses of the 2D culture cells versus 3D culture cells. So their survival, control, and then treated, control, treated in 2D and 3D is really different. So basically, cells will react differently in 3D to the drugs. And what I can guarantee you, if you are the person testing the drug, the cells in 2D are not more similar than cells in 3D. So the way cells responded to drugs here is how they will respond in the patient. So this is what we want to get. There are many 3D models available. I mean, different approaches, different ways to work. The most sophisticated model that also my colleague from ZEISS mentioned are the organoids. At the moment, we consider the organoids to be the highest level of 3D culture that you can do. What is organoid? It's a 3D mini organ. So you can either get it from the stem cells by differentiation, or you can take patient biopsy and then culture it. The idea of the organoid, maybe some of you know what is a spheroid. Spheroid is basically when you have the same cell population, but they are growing in the spheres. In organoids, they have different cell subtypes. So organoid is really mimicking in vivo structure and also this difference of the cell populations within an organ. And that's why the organoids, and here I put some nice images because we like to call them mini brain, mini gut, mini colon. Just a quick look will be very similar to the organ. Because if you have even the smallest organoid, it will look somehow like the big organ would. So the mini brain or the mini colon, you can really see the structures. Not to mention mini lung. So you can really see these alveolar structures that the lungs in general have. So the publication trends are growing. And also I can tell you that the pharma is using them more and more because the organoids are the best model for the human disease. What we did at Merck, we even commercialized organoids. So the first commercial organoids that we started selling is colon organoids. I don't have time to go into the details, so what basically my colleagues did. They took foreskin fibroblasts, they changed them into the induced pluripotent stem cells, and then they recapitulated embryogenesis, basically using different growth factors from pluripotent stem cells. They got first the finite endoderm, then they differentiated it into hindgut endoderm, and they ended with the organoids. Colon organoids that are small colon. In order to trust that this is a colon, we can look at the immunohistochemistry. So you can see that these colon organoids are positive for the most important markers like carbonic anhydrases, for mucins, icadirin. So it doesn't only look like colon organoid, it really is a small colon. And what we can do, we can provide you a vial with the frozen organoids. This is really a big thing because why we had this trend, why people didn't use 3D organoids before, it was really hard to develop them. It was expensive and hard to get nice organoids. Today, you can order a vial from Merck and you will get more than 200 organoids in a vial. So you can just start and culture them. Why would we start working with organoids? Here is an example of what I was talking about. So let's say classical assay that is used to study drug absorption, to study drug toxicity was Kako2 cellular assay. Okay? So what my colleagues in Merck did, they tried to use colon organoids as alternative to Kako assay. And what they did, they simply took five different compounds. Paracetamol, we all know it. Ketoprofen, we also know it. Aldosterone for some people who have difficulties. So let's say these were safe drugs that they wanted to test. Plus they took flavopiridol and loperamide, which they expected to give a little different results. And really, if you look at the survival rates, of course, paracetamol had no effect on organoid. The same with the ketoprofen, aldosterone. So the cells survive because, I mean, these are safe drugs that we already use. But it was completely different with flavopiridol and loperamide. Here we have example on the 3D organoid that really, you know, something that is not safe will not allow the organoid to form, the cells will die. So let's say this was alternative to doing a classical CACO assay to prove that these two drugs are not good, while these three are. So, and this is where we see the future. We see the future of, let's say, drugs targeting narrow disorders to be tested on mini brain, and the same to be done, let's say, for the colon organoids, for the colon cancer, for example. Finally, since COVID is so big today, and we also are interested in the infection biology, the second organoid that we made it was, of course, the lung. So I can tell you the timing was perfect. First, we published colon organoids, and then everybody overnight needed lung organoids. So what my colleagues did, they took the same pluripotent stem cells, they went to anterior foregut endoderm, they got small lung or bud organoids, and then they matured them into mature lung organoids. And these are real lungs, real mini lungs, because they have all the, let's say, sulfurtant proteins like B, C, they show all the subtypes of the cells that you would expect in the mature lungs, like airway globulate cells, pulmonary epiderm. And for all those interested in the COVID, also these organoids are showing the markers for AC2 receptor and the serine protease that are actually involved into how the SARS-CoV-2 is entering the cells. So we have now also a perfect model for studying the lung diseases and also for the COVID research. So the organoids are one component. This is when we are using the cellular model that is advanced. The second one is when we are trying to control completely their environment. I'm really happy that my colleagues from microscopy department were here, so guys, because they are providing with the powerful microscopes. I will show you a system that we have that is allowing you to control the environment of the cells while you are imaging it on their devices. So cells grown in static dish are of course different from in vivo because they have, let's say, a different exposure to the media. You cannot control their environment. You can only change media manually. While in microfluidics, as alternative approach, you can do dynamic assays over time. What am I talking about? Every cell in our tissue has its own place and a role. So the cell is not alone, it's in interaction with another cell, it's in interaction with the cellular matrix, and also next to it is a blood vessel. So all the food, oxygen our cells receive, they're received via some kind of a blood vessels. So this is called convective transport, and actually how everything is happening is by diffusive transport. So what we did in MAC, we created a system, microfluidic system, that will imitate these conditions where the cells are. So we have a chamber where the cell is static, just like in the tissue, but everything else is not static, because the cell is exposed to the perfusion. So we have special plates and special system controlling the perfusion, where there is a constant flow around the chamber that is allowing us to exchange everything in the chamber very quickly, and it's also allowing the cells always to get fresh media without any stress, and also everything that they wasted to be taken away from them. So our chamber is actually imitating in vivo conditions. And then this gives you flexibility to change anything, because by controlling what is going into the chamber, you can do different experiments. You can change the temperature in the chamber, you can change the oxygen level, you can make hypoxic chamber, you can control the growth factors, humidity, pH, osmolality. So this is a platform, the ideas are yours. So you're basically not limited at all. And the best thing is, these plates and the manifold that is covering it, they are a 9612 format, so they fit any microscope. So the only thing you need is a microscope, because our chambers have on their bottom this 1.5 thickness glass cover slide bottom, so you can do live imaging. So the original idea was to do the live imaging of everything that can happen. And let me now just show you how the cells are entering the chamber. So very, very easily, without any stress, this is how you fill the chamber. And then when your experiment is over, you can also use, for example, trypsin, and you can collect the cells for further analysis with qPCR or Western blotting. So the cells enter and go out from the chamber. And while they're in the chamber, you can do different things. So I will show you just some videos, and of course, the quality of the video and the image depends on the microscope. We are just giving you a platform where the cells will grow. So, for example, here we see some drug interrogation. So when we come to the yellow, the cells will be exposed to the drug. They will slightly start changing their morphology. Some of them were dying. If you're working with bacteria, here we have, let's go back. If you work with bacteria, here you can see the division of bacteria. They are fluorescent labeled with them cherry, so you can also do some kind of a tracking with them. I hope that you in the back see the images. Now you see, it's always good to be in front. Here we have the cells. So at some point they will all start going down. So here we are doing chemotaxis gradient, and then the cells will start moving downwards because we are attracting them downwards. Can you see? So now suddenly all of them starts going down. And for example, if you want to do some testing, for example, here we have bacteria, and then we will add antibiotic. Instant death, right? So you are the one deciding what you want to do. Chemotaxis gradients, long-term cultures, autophagy study, apoptotic studies, so there are no real limitations. One of the applications that I just wanted to highlight is, for example, host pathogen. So you can culture mammalian cells, then you can use the exposure to add bacteria to them, then you do another perfusion to get rid of the bacteria that didn't enter the cells, and then you can study the cells that were infected by bacteria. Maybe to see it even better here. So we have two lines. Here is invasive strain of E. coli, here is non-invasive strain, and it's red in order to be visible if they entered the cells or not. So obviously non-invasive strain didn't enter the bacteria, the cells, while the invasive strain did. So this is just one example where you're not changing media or temperature, you are adding something to the system. So by using this system in combination with the microscope you can maintain the temperature, or to have dynamic temperature changes. You can do changes of the gases, or you can manipulate environment in any different way. So it's a predictive cell line model, it's automated, you control the system, you program the system what you want it to do for you, and in this way you have full control of the cellular environment. And to conclude, the 3D models will allow us to replicate this real natural tissue environment and also the behavior of the cells in such environment. While the combination of microfluidic technology with this kind of automation allows you to completely manipulate the condition. So if you're doing a long-term or short-term experiment, you can set up this kind of a stable or dynamic cultures to imitate in vivo environment. And then finally, all together, like I started in the beginning, through all the breakthroughs in the cell culture, we will be able to study better the diseases, to study better the drugs, and in the end to, let's say, improve the life for all of us. And finally, thank you for your attention. Just to conclude once again, so we are here as your sponsor. We have everything you need for the cell culture, but also, as you could have seen on our booth, Sigma Object is really strong also in providing materials, polymers for the different drug deliveries. So whatever you need, my colleague Razvan was here with me, you can communicate with him, and I hope to see you all again on some similar events. So thank you once again for your attention.
Thank you also for the presentation and information that you gave us. And if you have comments, questions, please.
Great organoids, retinal organoids.
they are not yet ready.
But you're
So,
working on that.
I don't know exactly what Merck is making commercial. So if you want to make brain organoids, we have protocols, we have the growth factors, we don't have them in a vial. So at the moment I focus on what we have on the vial. So we can give you a vial with colon organoids.
Just to understand the concept, so you are making them, you are continuously producing them and then shipping them, or do you freeze them down in DMSO?
They can be, so the big benefit of the colon organoids, they can be frozen, you order them just like any cell culture. You get them frozen, and this is enough for you to start your own culture, and then just like with the cells, you can passage them, so I'm in direct contact with the product manager, over 100 passages they already made, and the cells are not differentiated. So we have a special, let's say, colon organoid media, and while you're culturing inside, you can also prosper them, which is very good for you because you don't have to buy them all the time from us. You buy them once and then you maintain and spread them yourself, and they are stable.
Because it takes 6 months to make a human retina organoid.
Yes.
That is the right age to do something with it. I don't know about the brain organoids, how long it takes, but for the retina for human, these are human cells, right?
These are all humans, yes.
Yeah, so that would be 6 months.
Yes.
For getting them to the stage where
I mean, different organoids, depending what is your exact purpose, what is your exact aim, they are difficult to make. And that's why we are making this kind of a presentation to show that this is really going very fast in a good direction, in simplification. Yeah. Because it was super expensive and like you said, time consuming to create any kind of an organoid so far.
Yeah.
It will be better.
So, thank you for the talk. I was saying I intrigued by the last part, which added microfluidics. My thought was how can we implement the microfluidics into organoids? Because it's not only about morphology and about I don't know, revealing some markers of differentiation. It's about providing the nutrients at the appropriate timing to mimic the actual organ. Because one of your first slides showed that 2D versus 3D. In 2D, cells were much more sensitive to a compound than the 3D models. So is it a matter of availability? How is easy for the compound to enter inside the organoid? And I don't know whether this really mimics the physiological conditions.
Well, I would
it's
say
only a philosophical.
No, I understand you. So I can tell you immediately, I don't know exactly what's happening. I can tell you what I think is happening. When we are alone, we are very vulnerable. Me, you, anyone. But when we are together, we are stronger. We can help each other. I think that in the 3D, in this, when you don't have a single cell exposed to something, but when you have this kind of a complex organization, I think that it's more resilient than the cell alone. And I think that somehow this is also maybe a factor that if you have 10 cells individually or 10 cells in one, let's say, pack, maybe the survival of the pack will be better. These 10 will die, but from these 10, maybe 7 or 8 will survive and 3 will die. So I think this is also a factor, because the cells are acting differently when they're in these complex organizations, like the tissue.
I think what Mihaela meant also is like a buffering effect, when what you're saying is kind of buffering effect. So it still sort of says, you know, if you have a proper concentration in the cell, it will be toxic. So that brings to the really question to the ratio of the drug per cell. Now your argument will be probably, yes, but in a vivo this is how it is, right?
Yes.
But still the negative drug effect or anything what you add will be exposing some of the cells. It's just how do we see it? Do we amplify? Do we see it better or not? So I think also one should probably use both of the systems.
Yes, exactly.
Because what she made is very important point.
Now, this would be ideal. That's why, on purpose, when I was preparing for the topic, From one side, I was talking about, because one of the things here you can see includes 3D capacity. So you can even take organoid and you can insert it into the chamber. And in this way, I would say you have these optimal conditions. When we are studying a better model in a better model, let's say, in a better instrument, because then you're imitating the in vivo environment and also in vivo, let's say, cellular interaction. This would be ideal, of course.
So, I'm collecting papers now about tissue geometry. So we normally think about cells, adhesion molecules, chemical fractals, all sorts of things. But what they do recently is they force organoids in shapes, and they start to reproduce the original shape in the body. For instance, exactly gut. So they start to see cryptid, okay? Or for the retina, or for the brain. So you force them either by cell surface adhesion differentials. So you make a stripe that is adhesive for molecule X, and then around it there is nothing, so the cells have to form themselves on that surface. Or you have like nanofluidics, nanomaterial holes, boxes, tubes, whatever. And so the mechanics of stuff also plays a role. So maybe we could direct some attention to that.
Like you have a mold, or you were making a mechanical sort of shape, and then you allow them to do that.
And that induces wind signaling, for instance, and frizzle signaling in the cells.
There are different models. This is not the only commercially available. We also have, for example, for those studying kidneys, we have from company Mimeta special chips that are exactly microfluidic model of a kidney. So, for example, I had to highlight something. We are limited with time, no?
Well, just a comment, because I'm a scientist, not an entrepreneur. And I was wondering, since this multifluidic system is fantastic, and well, apparently there have to be two steps. One related to research, the other one to application for what you said, the personalized medicine. And the point I have, and hopefully you'll be able to put it forward, what if we will make a sort of collaboration? So let us work together using your system to somehow shorten the research part and get for you closer to the market, because apparently if there is 1,000 euro or something like that, such a system, which I think should be pretty much disposable, then my father is not Rockefeller, so I think it might be difficult for us to play with such a beautiful system. So my point, naive of course, coming from a scientist but an entrepreneur, is what if we just in order to get closer to the market for you, could think of a sort of collaboration and working together using your system and our not only the knowledge expertise developed in this institute, but with other colleagues, to play a little bit with this, but not having the load of pay that has to be.
How much is it, this system?
I don't know if we can comment on the price here, because
it was like
it's much less expensive than the microscopes that you're using. So let's say it like this. So the microscope, I would say, is 5, 10, if not 100 times more expensive than this, because this is something that you put next to a microscope. You put this plate on your stage of the microscope, and then you are simply, this is actually making it possible for you not to buy the most expensive microscope with this huge chamber to control conditions, but even the simple invert confocal microscope now can have a complete environment control, because this is the element that is giving environment control. And in this way you are doing better live imaging, and also you are having a super microscope with complete control of the environment. And this is hard to get even with a big microscope, because we are talking here about very small volumes, so this chamber is really small. So this is not like a flask of 10 milliliters. These are a few microliters, so you can in a few seconds completely change the media in this kind of chamber. So if you want to do any kind of this quick drug exposure, quick bacteria exposure, whatever you want to test, quick temperature, heat shock, you will be able to do it easily, because it's a small volume, it's not millions of cells.
But it is still disposable, so I think...
The system is not disposable. The system you can use for many, many years. The plates are disposable part, because these are the plastic that you are using to culture the cells, right? And of course, if you're interested, we can support you with any publications to get the funding for the plates, for the system. We're always here. In the end, also to talk with the product managers. Razvan already has here locally in Romania experience with installing this system. He knows how it works. So really in Romania, you have a person who is even better than me to talk about what this system can do for you and how.
So why don't you mention something about research grants for, applications like this?
Well, globally, there's some programs for research grants.
From time to
From
time.
time to time, there are some grants that we can apply, but it's all global measure. It's not local. So, and there is some direction that Merck would like to develop on this things, because it's, of course, we are a commercial company. So we have to develop our own products. So
usually there is this kind of a call for applications for specific.
What we can do when such programs are launched, we inform the
yes,
yes. So then we can submit the
Also make sure to be active on the social networks. So on LinkedIn, follow Razvan, follow me. We usually share this kind of a call for applications when they happen. I mean, I know that every year we have one or two, sometimes they are chemistry related, sometimes biology related, so there are such things happening on the global level. And, but then on the other side, we can also help you get the funding from the state if you need publications, examples, references. So on this side, we are also active. So altogether, we want you to get this equipment to be able to do this better, finer science, right? Okay.
I think we can close now this session. Thanks to all the speakers. It was very interesting and diverse in a way, and I think we learned a little bit. And it was also kind of multidisciplinary, right? So now I have to ask Eugen.
No, there is no coffee break. There is no break at all.
That's right.
What I think we should do is to proceed with the round table, which should not be too long. It cannot be too long. Actually, what I think of it is that we still have to take some air. Eventually, perhaps we should switch on the chillers. But precisely what I would like from this round table is just to be the start of a round table that could most likely go on for maybe some weeks. That means we should just put the seeds on and not forget about them. What I wanted from this last, and for me was a challenge, because I do want this roundtable to launch a collaboration initiative addressing something that our society is still very much need. It is related to antimicrobial resistance, because we pinpointed the fact that yes, it is important to perform quite fast antimicrobial susceptibility tests, but we should also think about what if there is no drug
which is efficient to a specific pathogen strain. So we have to put all these things together, getting together people from various disciplines, so that's why I think it's important to be all together, not only biologists, physicists, engineers, but also medical doctors. And the first step would be to start understanding that, well, we can collaborate. There is a sort of meta language that we could easily understand, even if we just look at each other. So without too many words, so the alphabet can be written just while talking. The point is that I would like to invite just Professor Kifiliuk, Professor Sabu, just to give their insights about open issues. Any medical doctor who would like to join also, of course, Professor Octavian Popescu, because I think that we should again put some seeds and perhaps make an introduction of an open list of issues that we should consider in relationship with this aim. We should be related to the major problems encountered by medical doctors when they have to get a very fast response, to get a very fast recipe in order to save life for a patient who is very much in need of therapy. Please.
I could start. I think that I could dissect this problem in two parts at least. One is early diagnosis and early detection of antiviral-resistant bacteria. And here we have some limitations because the resistance mechanisms are very diverse. And also the